You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowing like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the third part of What If Naruto Meets Monster Girl Encyclopedia. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of martial anime on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Stop dodging and let me hit you already, the Thunderbird yells out as she sends yet another bolt of electricity at the gender-bent Uchiha, tearing up the ground as it moves towards her. This isn't going well, Sasuke says to herself as she side flips out of the lightning's path of destruction. She keeps her distance and is too fast to try any kind of direct attack from this distance, the Uchiha concludes as she glares up at the Thunderbird as she readies another barrage of lighting down at her. A weak little succubus that can't even use her wings doesn't have a sliver of a chance of even hitting me. Now just accept your loss already, the electricity-charged monster girl yell, clearly annoyed that she keeps missing, as she lets loose her build-up bolts of electricity. In the stands. You know, I'm surprised that she's actually fighting normally and isn't trying to do anything perverted to Sasuke, Sakura comments. Her growing annoyance with this world opens with SEC overriding her concern for Sasuke's safety. You're right, it's surprising that her lighting's strong enough to upturn the ground, Arya comments. So that's unusual? Kakashi asks while glancing over to the Lilin. Of course, normally a Thunderbird's electricity is meant to bring a strong feeling of pleasure, Arya says, getting a groan from Sakura. She must have put a lot of effort into increasing her power to make it more destructive, Arya continues, ignoring the irritated Pinkett. You must have pretty bad luck, Loona comments as she looks over to Sakura. What are you talking about? The Pinkett asks while sending a small annoyed glare at the princess. I'm referring to you being put on the same team as Naruto even though you have such a prudish view on sexuality, Loona calmly explains to the girl. Prudish. If you want to call me that for thinking that people should have some common decency in public then go ahead. Sakura nearly shouts at the dual-haired princess, getting several eye rolls and small laughs from the people around their little group. And here I thought you were making progress, Arya says with mock disappointment. Guess I'll just have to work harder to get you to see our side of things clearly, Arya cheerfully tells the Pinkett, getting a weary look from the girl as she scoots away from the Lilin. With Sasuke. This wouldn't be such a problem if I could get close to her, Sasuke thought to herself as she hid behind one of the rocks that were kicked up by her opponent's attacks. I swear, if I don't get my Naruto after going through all of this, the gender-swapped Uchiha tells herself as she works on wrapping wire around her hands. Peering around the rock, Sasuke takes note that the Thunderbird still hasn't found her as the woman zips back and forth looking for her. Stop hiding and just let me hit you already. You're really starting to PSS me off now, the Thunderbird shouts as the sparks flying off her increase with her temper. This is really going to hurt, Sasuke regretfully thinks to herself as she waits for the woman to fly over her position. It doesn't take long for the Thunderbird to make her way over to the rock Sasuke hid herself behind. Fly low, the woman lacked the time to react as several loops of wire were thrown up in front of her and pulled tight as she was passing through them. With her wings pulled to her sides, the Thunderbird had no way to counter Sasuke, yanking her down face first into the ground and tumbling for a few more feet, getting even more tangled up in wire. What the hell do you think you're doing? The Thunderbird yelled in rage as she managed to get up onto one knee. The electricity emanating through her body began to flow through the conductive wire binding her and straight to Sasuke as she did her best to close the distance between them, the young Uchiha wrapping the wire further around her hands with each step to keep it from going slack and giving the woman a chance to escape. This idea sucks, Sasuke commented to herself with a wince as the electricity flowing through the wire grew stronger and stronger with each passing second. Stay back, shouted the electricity-producing woman as she tried desperately to stumble her way back from the girl running at her. Not a chance. Sasuke yells as she reaches her opponent and lands a strong punch to her gut. Sasuke was about to go for another blow when she notices that she wasn't being electrocuted anymore. The sound of the Thunderbird dropping to the ground and curling up with a pained expression brought a feeling of both annoyance and relief to the gender-bent Uchiha. She can't take a hit. Sasuke thought to herself as she stared down at the woman in disbelief. In the stands. Looks like she forgot to put any time towards defense, Shikamaru commented as he leaned forward in his seat. With a seat up like that, I'd say that she'd be best fighting on a team. That way she'd have someone to cover for her lacking defense, Asuma says as he puts out his cigarette, reaching into his pocket for a new one to replace it shortly after. Well, at least it's a good example for the genin about what can happen if you focus too much on one kind of fighting technique, Kakashi says while glancing over the genin. Specializing in something is good and all, but if you don't have anything to back up that skill then your opponent can easily take you out if they're familiar with what you specialized in, the white-haired man tells them. Arya hummed when she saw Sasuke's next opponent step into the ring. Something wrong? Kurenai asks the limo when she notices her thoughtful look. Not really, just trying to figure out how long Sasuke has to fight. I'm guessing she's got 10 seconds, Arya tells the woman as she keeps her eyes looked onto the arena. What? Ino and Sakura nearly yell as they turn around to look at the Lilim. How could you say that? There's no way Sasuke would go down in 10 seconds. Ino tells the Lilim as she sends her a small glare. I agree, Kana adds to the small argument while waiting for the fight to start. See? Even Kana agrees with you. Sakura was smugly saying when the Kunoichi continued. She won't even last that long with the condition she'd in, Kana says, getting the two girls to direct their glares at her. With Sasuke. So you're up next then. I recommend you just give up now, Sasuke tells her opponent as she ignores her slightly heavy breaths and charred clothes. I would recommend the same for you. Victory would be mine even if you were not injured, the armored swordswoman tells Sasuke as she rests her opposite hand on the handle of the claymore strapped to her waist. Not going to happen, Sasuke tells Alk just before the round starts is announced. Now I just need two, Sasuke was thinking before her eyes widened at Alk's disappearance. As I said, my victory was determined before the match started, Alk tells Sasuke as she stands behind the girl and sheathes her sword while her knee-length cape flows from the quick movement of its wearer. Fast. How can someone be that fast? Sasuke asks herself as she shakily looks down to see the violet glow of the slash starting at her right peach and moving up to her left shoulder. If that sword was made from anything else, I'd be, Sasuke thought as she started to fall forward, her eyes closing as she closed in on the ground. Almost immediately after hitting the ground, Sasuke's body becomes shrouded in pink glow. Once the glow subsides, Sasuke's left laying on the ground as his normal self. Uchiha Succubi. DMN that other me. She put us through all that SHT and for what, the dope. Sasuke thought to himself as he reached the near-abandoned Uchiha compound. You shouldn't talk about yourself like that, female Sasuke tiredly tells her male counterpart. The first two fights had been rough on her, but the slash out gave her cut away nearly all of the demonic energy she'd managed to accumulate and ended up sleeping the whole night in order to recover. You're still around. I was starting to hope you'd been cut out of me last night, Sasuke tells his counterpart, annoyed that he still has to deal with her. You're certainly in a good mood this morning, female Sasuke sarcastically says. You took over my body, got Use beaten to unconsciousness, and embarrassed the Uchiha name in front on the nobility of that world. Seriously, what the hell kind of fighting was that? I was sore the rest of the night. I ended up going to the palace's infirmary to get some relief after the dance was over, Sasuke tells the girl, clearly pissed at what happened. Well, maybe if you'd let me use our body every now and then I'd be able to fight without getting my butt kicked in the process, female Sasuke tells her counterpart, getting annoyed with the boy. Forget it, you'll just run up to stuck that idiot, Sasuke tells her as he stops in front of his door and freezes with a somewhat disgusted expression. I can't believe I have to tell myself this, Sasuke tells himself as he smacks his forehead. You don't have to insult him like that. Besides, it's not like you're looking for a girl to help rebuild the clan. In fact, you avoid them like the plague, female Sasuke comments as Sasuke enters their house. Hey! Are you ignoring me? Female Sasuke shouts after a few minutes pass by without a reply. DMN it. You can't ignore me forever, you know, the Alp tells the boy as he slips his shoes off and walks further into the house acting like he hears nothing. I'm home, Sasuke announces as he turns into the living room. Only to stop as soon as he sees the person in said room. Before the young Uchiha is the familiar face of his beloved mother, but that sight isn't what has him frozen in place. Sitting atop the woman's raven lock are two dark violet horns with traces of red visible in the right light that start near the back of her head and move forward until they make a curve upwards when they reach just past her pointed ears. Protruding from her lower back and out of her normal dress are a pair of wings the same color as her horns with dark red spikes located at the junction where the fingers of her wings meet. Just beneath the violet wings swishes a long devilish violet tail that ends with a red heart. Moving back up to the woman's face, the young Uchiha only has enough time for one thought as the spinning tomo of his mother's Sharingan forces him into unconsciousness. Few minutes earlier. Sasuke should be home soon. I should change back to normal before he does, Mikoto mentally tells herself as she works on cleaning the house, using her tail as an extra hand to carry around and use her duster. Taking a moment to look at her demonic body, the oldest living Uchiha lets out a sigh as she closes her eye. I'm grateful for what Rei's help, really I am, but, Mikoto says before opening her eyes and looking at herself again. I wish she could have done it without giving me this body in the process, Mikoto says before letting out another sigh. I think I should go and ask Arya for another supply of spirit energy, Mikoto tells herself as she rubs her legs against one another. If I didn't have her to help me control these urges, Mikoto thinks before shuddering. I'd never be able to look Sasuke in the eye again if I had to resort to whoring myself out in order to sate my cravings, Mikoto mentally complains. It would be bad enough if I have to tell him about this, Mikoto thinks to herself when the sound of Sasuke announcing he's home brings her back to reality. Shit, Mikoto repeats in her head as she stares at Sasuke with a horrified expression as the boy looks at her, not even registering when her hold on the duster loosens and it drops to the floor. Without thinking, Mikoto activates her Sharingan and casts a weak genjutsu, but strong enough to knock him out, on Sasuke. Sasuke. Mikoto calls out as she runs over to her son. Good, he's not hurt, Mikoto says with relief after inspecting the boy, only to then start to panic again when she remembers the situation she's in. Okay Mikoto, calm down, Mikoto says as she lets go of Sasuke, resting him fully on her lap as she brings her arms to her chest and then extends them away from herself while letting out a deep breath to calm herself. He's already met Arya and has even been to her world. So that means explaining how this happened shouldn't be too hard, Mikoto says with a smile. But that means he'll also know about how that world's monsters normally feed. What if he asks about my SEC life? But I haven't had SEC since Fukaku. Mikoto says as her smile vanishes and she starts panicking again. I don't want to anything about your SEC life, a quiet and feminine voice tells the woman, drawing her attention back to her, daughter. What? Mikoto thinks to herself as she sits there on the floor and stares down as her son turns succubus. I can't really talk for the other Sasuke, but I don't mind you being a succubus. I actually kinda like it, Sasuke tiredly says as her wings lay limp and her tail lazily moves along the floor. Hope you don't mind, but I kinda lost a lot of demonic energy last night, so I can't really stay awake right now, Sasuke tells her mom with a yawn before closing her eyes and drifting off to sleep. What's going on here? Mikoto asks after 10 minutes of quietly watching her daughter sleep on her lap. What was that? I didn't even see her move. Kiba yells out as most of the other genin just stare dumbly at the arena as Sasuke is carried out on a stretcher. That, Kiba, would be the result of endless training in swordsmanship from a prodigy like Alk, Arya tells the boys with a smirk. So you know who she is? Asuma asks Arya only to have Erika answer for the Lilim. Of course Arya would know who General Alk is. Not only is she more skilled with a blade than any living creature in this world, but she's also the personal bodyguard for the Demon Lord's family, Erika tells the chain smoker while glancing at him out of the corner of her eye. You said, General Alk, why would a general be guarding a single family? Even if it's the one with as much power as Arias, Kurenai asks. She retired after being offered her current position, Loona tells the woman as she keeps her eyes on the arena. She would have quit being a general whether mom offered her a job or not, Arya says with an amused expression. Why's that? Shikamaru asks, his curiosity getting the better of him. Alk only joined in the first place to get battle experience and improve her swordsmanship, Arya begins to tell Alk's tall. To the group while she sits upright in her seat. It worked just as she planned and she became the youngest in known history to earn the title of general. Being only 14 at the time, Arya explains, getting a few widened eyes from the shinobi. That certainly does sound like a prodigy. So what happened? Kakashi asks the girl sitting above and to the right of him. I'm getting there. Arya happily says while rubbing the man's hair and getting an annoyed grunt from Kakashi. Alk quickly became a household name, being feared by those in the order and beloved by those she vowed to protect, Arya says with a happy smile once she finished messing up Kakashi's hair. But, Arya says as her smile turns to a slight frown. Even though she was loved and respected by those who served under her, she was cold and closed off to everyone around her. Her obsession with protecting everyone she could and passion for her swords were the only things on her mind, and she felt that friends and loved ones would only interfere. She became someone surrounded by love and admiration, but couldn't feel any of it, Arya recounts Alk's sad tale. She's eventually become powerful enough to take out entire armies single-handed and often did so to spare her soldiers from any possible harm. But, Arya says as her eyes show pity for the woman she's talking about. Alk hated every moment she had to fight. She felt no joy in defeating warrior after warrior. Eventually it became too much for her to bear on her own, and she bragged into my mother's throne room demanding that she be STRPPD of her rank and allowed to leave the military force. She even drew her sword and threatened to fight mom knowing that she'd never be able to win, Arya tells them. Wait. Why would your mother offer someone that just threatened her a position as her bodyguard? Sakura all but yells after finally shaking her disbelief of Sasuke losing so easily out of her head. Simple, Arya starts as she leans forward, to prevent her from doing something idiotic, Arya tells them. Seeing their confusion, Kakashi elaborates, giving Alk that position would give her a way to avoid the constant fighting while still being loyal to the royal family. Correct. Arya says as she goes to pat Kakashi's hair again but stops when the man gives her an annoyed glare. It was soon after that little incident that Naruto first showed up at the palace. Within a month of coming to visit me at the palace, every chance he got, the blonde ball of energy managed, much to everyone's surprise, to form a friendship with Alk. After that she started teaching him how to swing a sword, and to this day she hasn't become closer to anyone else, even with me, mother, and some of my sisters becoming friends with her as well, Arya says with a warm smile at the memories. Another teacher. I'm starting to feel a bit unimportant, Kakashi jokingly says. He's also had a few training sessions with my dad if you want to count that, Arya says with a playful smirk. Maybe I should step up their training if I want to make an impression on him, Kakashi says, a bit embarrassed about what he's taught the boy in comparison to his other teachers. What have you taught your team so far? Kana asks the masked man. Teamwork and the tree walking exercise, Kakashi answers while rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. After a small pause, Kana turns to Loona and asks, would it be alright for me to take some time off more frequently as to make sure Naruto's training isn't being affected poorly? I see no problem with that. I'm sure Naruto will appreciate having you as a teacher again, Loona informs her bodyguard/friend. That's not what I had in mind, Kakashi says with dropped shoulders only to be ignored by the two. In the arena. I don't suppose you could just let me win? Naruto asks the woman standing a short distance away from him while both of them stand with their swords drawn. I cannot allow myself to go easy on you. How would you learn if I did that? Alk tells him while giving the blonde a hardened look. Learn? Is she confusing this with training? Naruto asks himself as the start of the round is announced. Only the reflexes built up from years of training with the swordswoman allow the blonde to block Alk's strike to his side. Good, it seems you haven't forgotten any of our lessons, Alk says as she slowly pushes back Naruto while the blonde keeps her sword at bay with his own. Pulling her sword back to her side, Alk quickly spins around and slams her foot into the blade Naruto wields, sending him flying to the other side of the arena. Let's see if you've improved since last time, Alk tells the blonde as she raises her left hand. With her hand raised to the sky, the gemstone impeded into her gauntlet shines with a brilliant crimson light that fills the area, and the space above the arena begins to fill with red lights. Soon after their formation, the red lights shoot down at the ground and kick up a massive dust cloud that shields the arena from the spectators. What kind of attack was that? She hit the entire arena. Kiba complains as they stare at the dust cloud. At least Naruto lasted longer than Sasuke, right? Choji says. The fight isn't over, Arya says with a smirk. What do you mean it isn't over? Did you miss what just happened? Sakura asks the Lilim after turning around to face her. Just take a look at the arena, Arya tells the Pinkett as the dust cloud settles down. Arena. A battleground fit for a swordsman, Alk says as she stands with swords of all shapes and sizes piercing the arena floor. Now show me how much you've grown. Alk commands Naruto as she picks up a second sword before jumping into the air with a spin, catching a third sword by the hilt with her foot and then launching all three blades at the blonde. Stands. What the hell? She can just make weapons. Kiba yells out as the rest of the Genin watch the match closely. It's more likely that she just used something like a storage scroll, Kakashi tells the boy. That's right, Kakashi, Arya tells the man with a glance in his direction. The gem stones in her gauntlets are linked directly to her personal armory. As long as she has them, she'll never be without a weapon, Arya explains. Yes, even a small demonstration of her weapon such as this is quite impressive, Erika comments as she watches Naruto try and defend himself from Alk's onslaught. So this is small compared to what she can do. How many swords does she have? Kurenai asks as Hinata sits next to and wincing every time she sees Naruto take a hit. You'd have to ask her if you want specifics, but it's said that she can fill an entire war zone with enough swords to ensure that she'll never be out of arm's reach of one, Erika tells the woman. Arena. Hey Kurama, mind giving me a little help here? Naruto asks the giant nine-tailed fox sealed inside of him as Alk repeatedly cuts away his strength and points out every little flaw in his swordsmanship. Why should I help you? Kurama asks as he rests in the seal. Because I'm going to get my butt kicked if you don't. Naruto yells at the fox while narrowly avoiding a rapier strike to the forehead. Not my problem. Talk to me when someone's trying to kill you, Kurama tells the blonde before cutting off their conversation. Fine. I'll do this myself. Naruto tells himself as he grabs on of the swords next to him and starts trading blows with Alk as best he can. However, Alk's constant switching of weapons along with her mastery of these blades quickly leads to the blonde getting his butt handed to him. You still require a lot of improvement in your form, Alk tells the blonde after slashing through his chest and sending him flying. Don't, Naruto starts as he shakily gets back onto his feet. Count me out just yet, Naruto says as he puts his hands together and in a blast of smoke has the arena filled with clones. A cloning technique? Alk asks herself, genuinely surprised to see this as she looks around herself. You intend to win with numbers? Alk asks with a raised eyebrow. Surely you haven't forgotten my reputation? Alk asks as she drops her swords and the gem in her right gauntlet glows crimson. With a flash of crimson, Alk stands in the middle of Naruto's small army of clones with a long pure white scythe with the blade of a wide greatsword instead of the typical curved blade associated with the weapon. As if a command had been given, the clones all pick up the closest weapons to them and charge at the woman standing in the middle of them. There's no way I'm losing this time. Naruto roars as they reach Alk. It's still too soon for that, Alk calmly says as her own swords come within inches of slashing and piercing her. A burst of speed later and all of the clones within reach of Alk's scythe vanish in a puff of smoke. Numbers won't help you, Alk says as the white handle of her scythe breaks into segments and she begins to spin the now long-ranged weapon around her to act as a barrier. Then with a single yank on the chain in her hand has the blade of her scythe rocketing out around her, destroying every clone it comes in contact with as it moves around her. Are you ready to give me the match yet? Alk asks as the scythe comes back to her and reforms its handle. Never going to happen, Naruto says through heavy breaths as he stands back up and ignores the glowing slashes covering his body. She's going to hate me for using this, but I kinda don't have anything else to try, Naruto says to himself with a wince as he forms a dozen more clones. As I've already proven, Alk start as she squats down and holds her scythe out behind her, numbers won't be effective against me. Just as Alk propels herself forward to take out the new patch of clones, Naruto calls out the name of his attack, reverse HAREM jutsu. Stopping dead in her tracks, Alk can't help but blink a few times in utter shock as she stands there looking as a completely naked Naruto with his modesty only keeps by the trail of smoke covering his GNTLS. Now, there's no need for something like this, Naruto says as he genitally pushes the blade centimeters from his face away. WWHWW. Alk stutters out as her face turns crimson red to match the gems in her gauntlets and several of the Naruto clones come up from her sides and start to curse her. Unable to take the situation, Alk ends up fainting. As soon as the girl hits the ground, Naruto disperses his clones and watches as though the spirit energy she had stored inside of her leak out after her head rolls off with a look of utter bliss. In the stands. Hinata. Hinata, wake up. Kurenai tells the young Hyuga as she tries to wake the girl from her SXL fantasy brought on by Naruto's finishing attack. Looks like Alk and Hinata weren't the only ones to enjoy the match, Arya comments with a smile as she looks around at the woman in the stands cheering for more alongside those who passed out like Alk and Hinata. What about Dash? Arya was asking Ino and Sakura when the Pinkett interrupts the Lilim. Not a word, Sakura slowly says as her and Ino sit there with BLD leaking out of their noses and trying to ignore it, much to the Lilim's amusement. Was that enhanced by the jutsu, or does Naruto really look like that? Loona asks Arya. What are you asking? Erika nearly yells at Loona as she turns toward her with a beet red face and BLD pouring out of her nose. I can repeat the question if you didn't, Loona was saying with a small smirk when Erika yells, I know what you asked. Well, I'm sure you two will be happy to know that that was indeed what Naruto looks like, Arya cheerfully tells the two girls. Okay, seriously, can you stop talking? The less I know about Naruto's SEC life the better, Kiba tells the girls with a grossed out face and receives giggling from Loona and outright laughter from Arya. This response resulting in the boy groaning in annoyance knowing that they'll keep talking about it regardless. I'm so glad I made that jutsu, Naruto thought to himself as steadied his legs so not to fall. The blonde was nearly blown over however as two people rushed past him with a stretcher between them. The first was a tall man with short dirt blonde hair, blue-gray eyes, and like his companion he wore an all-white outfit. The second was a petite build, with mid-back length brown hair done in a braid, and large expressive brown eyes as she followed right behind. Like they did with any other fighter that couldn't leave the arena by themselves, the two rushed over to Alk. Grabbing her head was easy enough, but Naruto couldn't help but wonder how prepared these two were when Alk's body started clinging to and GRPNG the male medic when they tried to place her on the stretcher. At least there's only one more fight, Naruto happily thought to himself as he got his legs under control and stood up straight. As the female medic demonstrated quite a bit of strength by simply grabbing hold of both her partner and Alk and dragging them out of the arena like it was nothing, a winged shadow slowly moved over the blonde. I was actually looking forward to seeing how the great hero would fare against me, the Dragonic woman commented as she glided over the arena and softly landed as if she were weightless, turning to face him just before her feet touched the ground. It is a shame that our match came after your fight with that retired general, the woman said as her golden yellow eyes stared through him with a powerful glow behind them. Giving the woman a confident smirk, Naruto shoved a thumb into his chest while declaring, "Don't worry about me. I still have more than enough to win this." Though this declaration probably would have been cooler if Zabuza hadn't picked the blonde up by the back of his shirt seconds after making it. Get lost. This fight is mine, the ex-Kiri shinobi turned royal bodyguard told the blonde struggling to get out of his grip while looking at him with his usual glaring expression. Wah! Why would I dash? Naruto was starting to remark with sending his own glare at the man when the swordsman cut him off. I don't want her having any excuses for when I beat her, Zabuza said, redirecting and intensifying his glare at the draconic girl that was clearly amused with the whole situation as she looked on with a smirk. Now move it before I add a few more slashes to your body, the man said while tossing the blonde over his shoulder and out of the arena. After landing on his face, Naruto quickly sat up and turned back to the man. DMN it. You owe me for this. Naruto yelled at the man who didn't give any inclination that he heard the blonde. Why did Arya safe this BSTRD again? Naruto wondered as he tried to glare a hole through the back of his head. Attention everyone. It would appear that Naruto will be bowing out of the competition and the contestant who won the first round will be taking his place. Mina announced to everyone in the stands. Next to the palace worker sat the royal family in their private booth. I guess I won't be getting Naruto all to myself for the next week then, Sari commented with a sigh as her head dropped slightly and she leaned further back into her chair. Don't worry dear, her mother told her while placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. It was just bad luck is all, the brunette told her with a reassuring smile. Yeah, I guess you're right, the red-haired princess told her as she sat back up. Not to mention you still have him for the rest of the night, Joanna added as the hand she held on her daughter's shoulder moved to cover the smile she had when her daughter's face turned bright red at her mother's implication. Wait. Sari had a competitor in the tournament? Rudley asked with a very confused expression as he leaned forward to look at both his wife and daughter. Just keep watching the tournament dear. I can handle Sari's love life okay, Joanna told the muscular man who only seemed to become more confused at his wife saying things but listened to her regardless. So Princess Arya's little lapdog believes he can match the great Tiamat? Tiamat asked the man while resting the palm of her hand on the crystal hilt of a great sword left from the last match. You are either overconfident in yourself or incredibly stupid to believe such a thing, the woman calmly said with a small smirk as she looked down at the sword her hand was resting on as if she didn't even need to see the man in front of her to win the match. Let's see if you're still talking big when I cut you up, Zabuza retorted as he grabbed the sword Arya got made for him with his good arm and directed it at the dragon. Try not to complain too much when I win, Tiamat softly spoke as her wings shot open, pulling the nearby blades out of the ground with the gust of wind that came from her emerald wings. With Mina announcing the start of their match, Tiamat used the strength of her wings in conjunction with her legs, pushing herself forward with enough power to crack and break apart the ground she was standing on. Little more than a blink of an eye later has sparks flying as Tiamat's claws racked across the flat of Zabuza's blade. With her body still of the ground and flames beginning to pour out of the corners of her mouth, Tiamat looked straight into Zabuza's eyes and told him, because you don't stand a snowball's chance in hell of beating me. Using the brief moment between her sentence finishing and the flames rushing forth from her mouth, Zabuza began moving into a roll to avoid it while shifting his blade to take most of the fire's force. Avoiding most of the fire, the swordsman rolls to the left only to land back of his feet as he begins to swing his blade at his opponent as he turns to fully face her once again. It's pointless, Tiamat declared as she used her right arm to halt the man's sword. My scales are as hard as any armor, the draconic woman briefly explained as the man glared at the pitiful scratch on the arm he should have been able to cut clean through with that swing. Now do you see how outclassed you are? Tiamat asked the man as she slammed her left fist into the man's right cheek, sending him flying towards the pool of water in the center on the arena. After being sent tumbling through many of Alk's blades, the ex-Kiri shinobi stopped just past the water's edge. Quickly resurfacing and pulling himself up onto the water's surface with his good arm, Zabuza let out an infuriated grunt, becoming increasingly infuriated with the woman. As he knelt on the water with trails of the liquid constantly forming as it ran off his form, the man brought his right hand up to his left and began weaving hand signs. Don't think you can eat me that easily, the man called out to the draconic woman as he landed on the last sign, and Tiamat's eyes widened slightly as the water behind the man began to rise. Water style, water dragon jutsu, the man called out as the massive form of the water dragon fully formed and began its charge toward Tiamat. You believe this mockery will stop me? Tiamat roared as flames began to spew from her lips and rushing forth to clash with the mass of water headed for her. The collision of the two opposing forces cancelled one another and resulted in an explosion of steam that covered the field with enough force to blow Tiamat's dark night sky blue hair to back as she held up her arms to guard her face. Your dragon isn't doing so well, Arya stated as she looked down at the concealed field, a confident smirk adorning her soft lips. Humph! Erika turned to look at the Lilim from the corner of her eye. Your fighter gets one decent attack in and you start talking like the match is over, the vampire says with a smug smirk. Well, Arya starts as she flips her hand up towards the field. It helps when your hired muscle just helped set the arena in Zabuza's favor, Arya commented as she smiled down at her old friend. With her smirk dropping into a confused frown, Erika was about to ask what the girl meant when the sound and flash of repeated blasts of fire drew her attention back to the arena. From the cloud of mist covering the field could be seen rapid flashes of orange light with a few steams of fire shooting out of the cloud every few seconds. Zabuza specializes in the silent killing technique, Kakashi began to explain as he glanced over at the confused vampire. Even in zero viability he can find his opponent with ease and then finish them off with a single strike. His victims rarely ever know what happens as Zabuza takes them out in the blink of an eye, Kakashi told Erika. With a quick sneer and huff, Erika turned back to face the field. As if such a cowardly technique would work on Tiamat, Erika commented with a small pout as she refused to even consider losing thins to Arya. Stop hiding and face me like a real warrior. Tiamat yelled out into the mist as flames left over from her last burst of fire still lingered on her lips. The sound of something cutting through the air caught her attention and she raised her left arm to block the oncoming blade. As Zabuza's large executioner's blade bounced off of her scales and landed on the ground, the form of the swordsman himself appeared behind her. With a single chakra-infused swing of his new blade, the man cut right through the dragon, leaving a glowing mark from her right shoulder down to just under her left breast. So much for that hide of yours, Zabuza commented, only to be sliced by Tiamat's claws after she spun around in anger to retaliate, only for her to roar out in rage, sending a massive blast of fire straight up after having the man turn into a pile of water. As Tiamat was busy coating anything around her in flames, Zabuza stood atop the water's surface going through hand signs. Finishing the signs, the man stood there as a circling vortex of water formed in front of him. Water style, Great Waterfall Jutsu, Zabuza called out as the massive churning vortex of water started to surge towards Tiamat. Breathing heavily as she stood in the center of her ring of fire, Tiamat had very little time to react as she just barely managed to bring her arms up in some form of defense as the wall of water slammed into her from the side. It wasn't long before the woman was sent out of the arena at the front of the vortex and slammed into the wall just under the stands. Dropping down onto her hands and knees, the dragoness started coughing out water that managed to get into her lungs. I want, Tiamat thought to herself as she knelt there completely soaked to the bone with her dark hair forming a curtain around her dropped head. The lager puddles of water scattered around her began to rapidly evaporate as she gritted her teeth. Along with the water on her body. I won't lose to this bstrd. Tiamat roared as she yanked her head up with a look of utter rage as her form was quickly shrouded in steam and fire. With massive wings spread wide blocking the spectator's view of the field, Tiamat stood on her hind legs and roared up into the night sky. Her terrifying form covered in dazzling green scales that glowed with the light of the fire left over from her rapid transformation. Atop her horned head and running along her spine she had scales of the same midnight blue as her hair had been before it seamlessly faded in with the rest of her body. Lowering her head, the dragon let loose a torrent of fire on the mist-filled arena, removing the mist with a layer of steam radiating from the newly boiling ground. She doesn't take a loss very well, does she? Arya asked with a strained smile as she, along with the others with varying degrees of shock and speechlessness, stare at the enraged dragoness. That's not really my fault, now is it? Erika retorts as she turns around to look at the white-haired girl with a victorious smile. Is that even fair? Ino blurted out as she pointed at the dragon. That has to be cheating, right? The the blonde adds as she turns her head towards the vampire. There are no rules stating that she cannot use her transformation, Loona comments as her and Kana busy themselves with the events occurring in the ring. What's wrong? Tiamat called out as she swiped her hand across the ground, shattering it and sending swords of all shapes and sizes flying. Afraid to fight me now that you can't hide in your mist? Tiamat accused as she kept her eyes locked on the man running and dodging her strikes. Jumping behind an upturned piece of the now thoroughly destroyed field to avoid another stream of fire from the woman, Zabuza took the brief moment to catch his breath as he sat down with his back pressed against the large rock. This is starting to piss me off, the man thought to himself with a glare as he reached into his pouch. Hiding won't help you no dash, Tiamat was saying as she rushed her head past Zabuza's hiding spot with flames spilling from her jaws when the ball that looked like it was made from paper slips was thrown in front of her face by the man and exploded in a blinding flash. Gwa! Tiamat roared as she flung her head back while thrashing it violently. You bstrd. I'll kill you for this, the dragon roared out as she tried to shake the effects of the flash bomb out of her eyes. Easily jumping out of the way of the woman's hand as she blindly lashes out at the spot she saw him, Zabuza landed on her outstretched arm and began to run up it, quickly making it up to her shoulder despite her massive wings trying to create gusts powerful enough to blow him back. While cursing the man out, Tiamat desperately tried to remove the man from her body with her opposing hand while sending rocks and boulders flying at him, using her tail to crash into them from the ground. Why don't you just shut up already? Zabuza told the woman after running up the back of her neck and taking his Demon Realm silver blade and running it into the top of her head. Just as he was about to start a barrage of attacks on her in her weakened state, Zabuza found himself griping into the hilt of his sword for stability as Tiamat's head began to move rapidly. Briefly looking around, Zabuza found himself unable to react quickly enough when he realized what she was doing. With a loud crash, Tiamat slammed her head into the ground as hard as she could, tearing up the field even more and throwing up a cloud of dust and debris. Glowing with demonic energy and reverting back down to her human-like form, Tiamat stood shakily at the edge of the small crater she made with her head, a smug smirk playing across her lips as a trickle of blood coming from the top of her head where she slammed it into the ground ran down the center of her face. Slowly starting to chuckle to herself as she looks down at Zabuza's unconscious form, Tiamat quickly begins to laugh while pointing at the man, ha ha ha. Take that, you stupid bstrd. Take that, Arya. Erika yells as she stands up with one foot propped up on her seat while she points at the Lilim as Mina announces Tiamat the winner. Meanwhile, the white-haired princess sat there with a strange smile while her left eyebrow started twitching, trying really hard not to blast her old friend out of the castle as she sits there and listens to her bragging. Now on to the final round. Mina called out, stopping Erika and Tiamat in the middle of their celebration. Final round. Tiamat/Erika shouted, both looking over to the purple-haired maid in confusion. Now, let the match between Tiamat and Princess Rosamund begin. Mina announced. I wonder why Rosa entered. Arya wondered as she looked on in surprise as she elder sister gently glided down to the field and softly landed on one of the boulders that used to make up the gently inclined arena, while Erika looked on in horror as her victory over Arya began to slip away from her more and more with each passing second. If she just wants to sleep with Naruto, she could always just ask, Arya commented as her left arm rested just below her melons and her right hand went up to rub her chin as Ino, Sakura, Kiba, and Choji were sending her weird looks for saying it. Finished already? But I only got to use one move, Rosa said with a slight pout as she stood in the same spot she landed with a tilted head and her right hand held out like she was using a pretend pistol as her pointer finger was stretched out with her thumb held straight up. Oh well, the Lilim said with a joyful smile across her lips as she moved her right hand to rest on just below her right cheek, maybe you'll put on a better show next time. Destri should be happy with this. Meanwhile, Tiamat was flat on her back, out cold from the restrained blast Rosa hit her with. Ha ha. Rutley let out a hearty laugh as he threw his head back with his right hand resting on his muscular stomach. A win straight out of nowhere. I bet the guests never saw this outcome. Rutley said as he looked over to his wife. Yes, darling, I have no doubt they enjoyed the matches, Joanna said with a warm and gentle smile while on the inside she was trying to figure out how much time and money it would take to have the field repaired. So how did you enjoy the tournament, Sari? Huh? Joanna asked as she turned to her daughter's seat only to don a confused look when she finds it empty. She left halfway between Tiamat and Zabuza's match, Mina clarifies for her queen while looking over her shoulder with a smile. A short time later. Thank you so much Princess Arya, a appealing woman with long curving nearly white blonde hair, flawlessly pale skin, amber-colored eyes framed by her blonde locks, and wearing a burnt orange dress with a slit running up her left leg and barley covering her rather large bust beamed as she vigorously shook the Lilim's hand. You truly are wonderful. Having Naruto be the grand prize was simply genius, the White said as she continued to shake Arya's hand with a beaming smile. It was my pleasure. Anything to make tonight's events more enjoyable, Arya said with a warm expression as she managed to slip her hand out of the woman's hold. It warms my heart to see my efforts were not in vain, the princess spoke while her thoughts were focused somewhere else. The others are definitely going to kill me when I get home, the girl thought, doing her best not to let her lack of safety in the near future show as she forces a strained smile. Luckily the White and her husband appear to happy about the turn of events to notice. Our little girl is going to be so excited when she finds out about this, the man, standing at least a head taller than everyone else, said as he draped his rather thin arm considering his height around his wife's shoulder. It broke our hearts when Fushi came down with a cold and couldn't come to the party, the man said as he placed his free hand over his heart with tears streaming down his cheeks. We were going to stay behind with her but she insisted that we come and enjoy the party anyway, he said as he lifted up his arm to wipe away the tears with his sleeve. Cold? Arya asked with a concerned and questioning expression. Oh, it's just a little cold, Destri said with a short wave of her hand, ignoring her beloved's overdramatic antics. She should be back to full health by now in fact. We just couldn't risk making it worse by having her traveling like this, Destri reassured Arya. By the way, the man began to say, his tears dried up, where is Naruto? I'd like to formally meet the young man who'll be keeping my daughter company for the next few days. Sari's bedchamber. I can imagine you've been in this situation before, Sari comments with a cocky smirk after pushing he blonde onto her bed and straddling his lap. I hope you don't mind if inexperienced me takes the lead, the princess tells him as she slides her hands from Naruto's shoulders slowly down his chest, unbuttoning his tattered and torn tux as they move towards his waist. Reaching down to grab her wrists, Naruto asked, are you sure you're okay with this? We can go slower if Yogwa, before being cut off when Sari yanked his shirt and hands up over his face, exposing his toned chest to the gentle desert breeze blowing in from the open balcony doors. Do you ask that to every girl you sleep with or am I just special? The princess asks with a smile as she reaches up to the top of her dress, leaving Naruto's shirt over his face. I don't usually get the chance, the blonde retorts as he quickly shakes his head out the bottom of his shirt turned blndfld, only to pause momentarily from freeing his arms as he takes in the sight of the redhead sitting on top of him. Don't worry so much, Sari warmly tells him as she looks down at him with her dress pulled down to show off her hand-filling chest in the light of the full moon before slowly leaning down to his face. If I wasn't ready for this then you'd have never seen me this way, the princess says as she closes the distance between them and then finally pressing her lips against his. Letting her hands rake through his golden looks as the two share in a loving kiss as the blonde works on getting his arms out of his shirt and tossing it aside. The princess quickly finds herself pulling back slightly to let out a small gasp when she feels the blonde's growing bulge brush up against her clothed maidenhood. Having freed his hands, Naruto reaches around the girl above him to try and remove her clothing as he leans up and begins kissing and nipping at the base of her neck. His attempts to remove Sari's dress were cut short however when the girl took hold of his wrists and put his arms down next to his head. Could we leave the dress on for now? Sari asks as she removes her hands from Naruto's wrists to place one on the bed for support while the second begins traveling down to the blonde's pants. Letting her have her way, Naruto propped himself up slightly with one arm, using the other to play with her BRST as he takes the other into his mouth. With her breath picking up, Sari's hand reaches its destination and fumbles slightly as she works on freeing the blonde's erection. Despite her inexperience and having the view blocked by her dress, Sari manages to get the blondes out of his pants. With Naruto pleasuring her melons and feeling the need to give her womanhood a similar or even stronger level of pleasure begins to grind her sec up and down Naruto's. After several minutes of staying like this, Sari lifts her wet panty-clad sec off Naruto. Leaning up straight and pulling her blonde lover up with him, the princess lowered her free hand down and underneath her dress in order to pull her soaked panties to the side. "I don't think I can wait much longer," Sari tells Naruto as she looks into his eyes with a deep blush covering her cheeks. After a couple of failed attempts at trying to put Naruto's femme juice coated into her waiting maidenhood in her corny state, Naruto reaches down with his own hand to help her guide it in. Having some trouble, the blonde asks with a teasing smirk as Sari averts her gaze, her cheeks becoming even redder out of embarrassment. "Jay just put it in already," Sari stutters out, trying to move past her first-time mistakes. "As you wish, my princess," Naruto comments before turning her face back towards his and thrusting up into her while taking her lips into another more passionate kiss. Even though she lost him years ago, having Naruto stretching her out like this still stung. Breaking the kiss, Naruto tells her to relax as he slowly inches his way further into her recently version pages. Once sufficiently inside the princess, Naruto brought the hand he had resting on the girl's peach to her untouched CLT to try and divert her attention away from the intrusion as her body grew used to it. "Naruto," Sari breaths out after several minutes of having Naruto play with her CLT and melons getting his attention. "Why, you can start moving now," the princess says as her own peach start to move. With a quick nod, Naruto moves his hands onto her peach with a thumb staying on her CLTRS and begins to move with Sari's own peach movements. Starting off slowly at first, it isn't long before the two of them are going at a fast pace, with Sari all but smothering her blonde lover between her melons as she rides his PP while out her passion. This feels incredible. Sari all but yelled out as her walls began to tighten around Naruto's, making her vice-like grip even tighter as her CLMX quickly approached. Hearing that put a confident grin on the blonde's pleasured expression as his own CLMX was coming near. With cries of their joy ringing through the room, both of them climaxed together as Naruto rammed himself as far as he could inside of her and held her tightly to himself as he released his juices into the princess. Taking a minute to catch her breath, Sari held on to her lover with her head resting on his head as she basked in the afterglow of her release. Lifting herself up and off of Naruto, Sari knelt above Naruto's waist as she felt his juice leaking out of her womanhood and beginning its path down her thigh. "Guess I shouldn't be surprised that the lover of one of the demon lord's daughters can leak so much," Sari thought with a smile as she reached down to lift up her dress. "Guess I'm never using these panties again," the princess comments as she stares at the ruined frilly garment hanging to her waist. "Ah, sorry about that," Naruto apologizes with a nervous chuckle and smile. "They're just panties," Sari says with a shrug before pushing Naruto onto his back. "I want to try something," the redhead told Naruto with her best CC look as she leaned down and backed up until her face was in front of his, still irked. Brushing a few strands of hair back and grasping the base with her hand, the princess leans down to give the tip an experimental lick. After pausing briefly to let the mixture of their love juices wash over her tongue, Sari leans back down and begins eating along the base of the blondes. With a grin playing across her lips after glancing up to see the blonde head thrown back in pleasure, Sari moved up his to take the head into her mouth. After a few minutes of bobbing her head up and down Naruto's urkin, and a few gags when the head brushed against the entrance of her throat, Sari leaned up, pulling her mouth off of the blonde's urkin, a strand of spit briefly keeping them connected. Before the blonde could question what she was up to, the red-haired princess leaned up and placed his between her melons. With her saliva and both of their remaining juices as lubricant, Sari had no issue sliding her melons up and down his as her hands pushed them together around him. Going at a fast pace, Sari takes great joy in seeing the blonde all but writhing in pleasure because of her actions before capturing the head in her mouth again to resume her unrefined BLWJB as she assaults Naruto's urkin his her melons. Within minutes, Naruto was warning her of his approaching orgasm. Hearing this, she took her mouth off of Naruto's PP and put all of her effort and focus into her tit job. It wasn't even a minute before the blonde was letting ropes of his juices flying into the air only for them to back down onto the girl responsible for their release. As Naruto's CLMX was coming to an end, the force of his Ichkulten grew weaker as the last of his shots hit the princess directly in the face and open mouth. By the end of it, Sari was left with strands of juices clinging to her red locks, pretty face, round, perky melons, and staining the blue fabric of her ballroom dress. Wiping the glops of juices covering her face away and eating up the strands around her mouth, the princess was unsure of how to describe the taste other than enjoying it. Seeing Naruto propped up on his elbows after her brief clean-up, she quickly shot up to take his lips again. Pulling back after the short-lived kiss with the slightly surprised blonde, Sari said with a smile, "I don't care who won in the end, I have you for the rest of the night and I'm going to make the most out of the time we have," before grabbing hold of his shoulders and rolling over to have him on top. Standing outside one of Konoha's hot springs, Sakura was busying herself with looking between the letter and one free hot spring visit coupon she got in the mail that morning. Why did she send me this? The Pinkett wondered to herself as she tried to image what sort of nefarious situation the Lilin princess was concocting. "Are you going to just stand there all day?" Ino asked, snapping Sakura out of her thoughts as she turned to look at the blonde standing next to her. "You got one too then?" Sakura asked with a somewhat amused expression as she held up her letter for the girl to see more clearly. "Yep," the blonde answered as she brought out her own letter. "Any idea what she's planning?" the girl asked as she moved the hand with the letter in it to rest on her waist. "Not at all," Sakura said with a sigh as she lazily throws up her arms and shrugged. "Might as well get this over with," the Pinkett said as she turned back towards the entrance and proceeded to walk in, Ino following right behind her. Entering the check-in room, the two shinobi were met by a relatively young woman with jet black hair pulled back into a bun and wearing a light pink kimono with a white flower pattern running up her left side and a yellow obi keeping it tied shut, standing behind the front desk. With an apologetic smile, the woman began to say, "I'm sorry, but we're closed for the day. You'll have to OH," before seeing the pieces of paper the two girls were holding. "Forgive me. You must be Lady Aria's guests. Please proceed, I'm sure she's waiting for you," the woman said with a small bow. Giving one another odd looks, the two girls silently made their way to the woman's changing room. Several minutes later, inside the hot spring. "You two decided to come after all," Arya joyfully said as she watched the two young shinobi walk out of the changing room. The Lilin was currently enjoying the warm water of the spring as she, along with most of her home's occupants, as she relaxed along the side of the hot spring with her white hair done up in a lost bun and the water covering her naked form from mid-brst down. "I don't remember these hot springs being so large," Ino voices her curiosity as the two of them reach the water's edge. "We asked the spring owners to take down the walls separating the girls' and men's side of the hot springs when the girls' side started to become too crowded for us," Suki informed them from her little corner of the spring as she brought out a portion of her long dragonic body for emphasis. "They've been kind enough to do this every time we rent out the springs after," the Ryu added as her body sank beneath the water's surface once more and she reached over to grab hold of her glass sitting next to her. "Yeah, I guess that makes sense," Ino comments as she and Sakura slipped into the spring. Both girls were surprised that nothing weird had happened or was happening when they arrived, positive that the demon princess would be up to something. "It sounds like you've been coming here for a while. I thought you were trying to keep a low profile all these years," Sakura points out with a teasing expression, hoping to get even a little bit of an edge over the monster. "Enough money will keep anyone quiet," Zabuza answered before Arya could herself. Turning to give the man sitting behind a rock blocking him from view of anyone entering from the women's side an odd look, the two of them quickly did a double take as their odd looks became one of shock as they rapidly back away from the naked man sitting just out of arm's reach of them and nearly slamming into Arya. "It's not just the money Lady Arya and her family have donated," a woman with long light brown hair pulled into a braid that went down her back, emerald green cat-slitted eyes, long canines, two cat ears sticking out the top of her head, furry paws for her hands and feet, and two tails sticking out of the back of the same kimono the receptionist was wearing, commented as she leaned down to hand the muscular man his drink. "It's an honor to have a daughter of the royal family visit and an even greater honor to have her be such a regular customer," the Nikomata said as Ino and Sakura gaping like fish out of water as they started at the man while covering themselves with their arms. "You sure you're not just happy to have you's visit because Arya and Naruto introduced you to your husband?" Miyaka responded, referring to the spring's owner. Turning around with a faint blush adorning her cheeks, the Nikomata mumbled something to herself before walking back to the building, leaving the fox as her many tails swished around her, Hinata, and Kuranai with a victorious smile playing across her kissable lips. I bet you two were excited when you received my invitation, no? Arya asked the two girls next to her after the attendant exited the hot spring. Shakily turning their heads around to send the Lilim hate-filled looks before the two yelled out in sync, "Why the hell is he in here with us?" while keeping their chests covered. While Arya was busy getting the ringing sound out of her ear, Caroline wanted to add her part to the conversation. Where else would he be? The hostess asked, not entirely seeing why the two girls were so upset. They were about to berate her for what they saw as a stupid question when Ray silenced them by wrapping tendrils of water around their mouths. Would you two stop yelling? We're supposed to be relaxing, the magically gifted girl said as she sent them half-hearted glares from her spot a few feet on the other side of Arya. Besides, he's not even the only male here, the Lich said, directing their attention to where everyone was. Straight and to the right was Miyaka, Hinata, and Kuranai. Miyaka greatly enjoying the company the two provided her as Hinata tried her hardest not to faint from being in a mic'd bathing hot spring, and Kuranai, for the most part, was there to keep Arya from turning her student into a SXL deviant. Close to them sat the holy warrior that stayed with the group. Freya was perfectly content sitting away from the corrupted members of the household and just kept to herself. All the way to the right of them was Suki, whose large body took up the majority of the leg room around her despite her trying to take up as little space as possible. Between Suki and Rei sat the two remaining members of the Uchiha clan, much to their surprise, enjoying a bit of mother-slash-daughter time. To the left of them sat Zabuza without a scrap of clothing on him, showing his face and razor-sharp teeth as a result. Next to the imposing man sat the newest addition to the Uzumaki household. The lizardman had mostly kept to herself when she wasn't trying to prove her worth to the man she had asked to marry a few days ago. Rounding up their little group, Haku sat with her back propped up against one of the rocks sticking out of the water for a natural look while facing the two swordsmen. At the edge of the spring behind Haku had Caroline, relaxing as she let the warm water support a good portion of her melon's weight and taking it off of her back. Next to her was the house's maid Adil, leaning back with her arms resting on the stone floor behind her and eyes closed as the hot spring did wonders for her stressed muscles. Further left, where the men's side was connected by a narrow section of water, Shikamaru was sitting with his back facing them as Ma sat pressed up against him and Choji sat a few feet away on the other side. Opposite from them was Kiba and Kamas, and on the far side of their side sat Shino, still wearing his sunglasses, with the familiar Gertabulu laying down behind him with her chin resting next to his shoulder. Out of the water, Bako was enjoying the steam that rose from the water much like the living doll and her pink slime friend who sat at the water's edge by themselves. Aren't you two supposed to be shinobi? Zabuza questioned as he looked at the two out of the corner of his eye. With the two girls glaring at him, the man said, more to himself, "You lot of brats get craped out by a little skin showing, pathetic. I guarantee you're going to end up seeing a lot more junk in future missions. Might as well SCK it up now and get over it," and with that the man proceeded to ignore the two girls. "Don't worry, I'm sure you'll adjust in no time," Arya said with a warm smile as the water around their mouths dropped back down to the rest. "If it makes you feel any better, Rei had trouble the first few times she came to the hot spring with everyone else," Arya said with a small wave of her hand, causing Ino and Sakura's annoyed expressions to turn to ones of confusion as they looked from the Lilim to Rei, who was sending the white-haired girl her best death glare, and back to Arya. "You're joking, right?" Ino asked with a raised eyebrow. "Yeah, have you met Rei?" Sakura asked. With a roll of her eyes the Lilim told them, "Of course. We've known each other for years." With a smile Arya turns to look at Rei. She had such bright violet hair, fair skin, and she wasn't very good at hiding her emotions, Arya said as she patted the annoyed Lich's head. Glancing back at the two girls' disbelieving stares, Arya decided to add, "She also happened to still be human when we first met." "She used to be human," the two ask in unison as Rei removes Arya's hand from her head. "I don't know why you're so surprised," Arya comments with a wide grin. If you just asked anything about our past, I'm sure you would have known by now. We're not keeping our past secret, you know. Arya tells them as she leans back against the spring's edge. So we just have to ask and you'll tell us anything? Sasuke asks as she drifts over to them, having been half paying attention to their conversation. But of course, an elated Lilim said as she clapped her hands together. With her eyes and grin widening, the gender-challenged Uchiha let everyone know her request as she cheerfully asked, "Can you tell us about one of Naruto's adventures? I barely know anything about what he did before we graduated." Hearing her joyful request, some like Shikamaru and Choji simply gauged, still getting used to the personality change this Sasuke has, while Zabuza just huffed, pretending not to be paying attention, and her mother looked unhappily as her child smiled so joyfully, even if it all but required a sec change. "Sure, anything specific?" Arya asked, finding the girl's enthusiasm cute. "How he became a hero would be nice," Ino said, drawing everyone's attention to her. "What? It'd be nice to know why everyone's always praising him in their world," the platinum blonde said, mostly to her pink-haired friend than anyone else. "Oh, nice choice," the demon princess cheered as she sat up straight. Turning to Ray, the Lilim asked, "Do you want to help tell the story? I'm sure there are parts you remember better than me." "Sure, I can do that," Ray informed the girl. "Wonderful. Now let's start at the beginning, shall we? It all started when Mother sent me and Naruto on a diplomatic mission in Vefate with Dottie a little over 4 years ago." Arya began to detail their adventure to anyone willing to listen. 4 years ago, Kingdom of Vefate. Sitting on the high-quality red cushions of the richly made carriage with her legs propped up beside her, a young Arya wore a red jacket with magic woven into its threads for producing and keeping a comfortable temperature for its wearer, with a matching hat covering the top of her head. Under the warm clothing, the girl wore clothing that covered her body far more than she was used to, as the form-fitting black clothes left only her face and hands visible. "Isn't there a better way to reach the castle than this?" Arya asks with a bored look as she stares out into the pitch-black mountain night. "No, there is not," a woman sitting across from Arya with the same Lilim features shared by all of her sisters told her. The older Lilim wore a similar outfit with a dark gray color to her hat and jacket instead of the red her younger sister wore. Her long white hair was in a braid that went down the left of her and over her large B-cup chest, with her bangs framing her red calculating eyes, and her arms folded beneath her melons. The mountains that make up the bulk of Vefate's territory are shrouded in powerful blizzards most of the year. As such, hiring someone familiar with the area to guide us through the blinding storms is necessary, Dottie explained to the young girl. "Then why would anyone want to live here?" the growingly annoyed girl asked as her tail swished back and forth absent-mindedly in front of the blonde sitting beside her. "It sounds like you've spent too much time behind the palace's lavish walls," a man sitting across from Naruto and roughly the same age as Dottie commented as the light inside the carriage cast a glare on one side of his glasses, only allowing one of his gray eyes to be visible. "What's that supposed to mean?" Arya demanded as her head shoot around to glare at the man. "You've never left the safety of the palace, at least, not without the aid of one of the many portals linking us to other allied nobility. If I remember correctly," the man with moderately long brown hair and a matching, even if rather short, goatee questioned the pampered princess. "Utter lies." Arya shoot back with an outstretched hand. "I have been to more than palaces and mansions belonging to nobles," the girl confidently declares. "I would hardly count the brief amount of time you and your mother traveled to Naruto's home village as being relevant," the man said, getting a glare and gritted teeth in return from the girl. "So," Naruto began as he watched Arya out of the corner of his eye. "What's so important about this place anyway?" the blonde finished, looking directly at Dottie. "It's simple once you give it a little thought," Dottie begins with a smile. "Vefate has very little in natural resources, but a very large and powerful military force in the region," Dottie explains while making sure the blonde is following. "Now, if you were in Vefate's potion and were surrounded by nations plentiful in natural resources and farmland, what would you do?" the Lilim asks the young boy. Taking a minute or two to think about it and having Dottie smile at his thinking face, Naruto came up with an answer. I'd ask them to share," the blonde said with a hint of uncertainty in his answer. With a few quick chuckles Dottie said, "You are much more kind than the rulers of Veyfate then." Seeing Naruto giving her an odd look she continued, "You suggest a diplomatic approach to solving your country's resource problems." Dottie translates the boy's answer into something more politically viable. "But this is not the solution Veyfate has chosen," Dottie says as she watches the boy's face become even more confused. "The surrounding countries are weak militarily and Veyfate takes advantage of this with a silent threat to wipe out any number of them that refuse to meet their demands," Dottie explains. "What?" Naruto shouts, causing Arya to cover her ears due to sitting right next to him and elbowing his rib cage. "They sound like a bunch of thugs," the blonde says as he holds his side with a smirking Arya next to him. "In a sense they are," Dottie tells him. "Normally we'd ignore Veyfate seeing as they have been inactive in the conflict between the Order and the Demon Realm since long before Mother rose to the position of Demon Lord, but that has become impossible," Dottie tells Naruto. "Because they've asked for members of both sides to come and argue over which side they should choose," Arya adds to the conversation seeing nothing better to do. "I see you were paying attention when Mother was explaining why the two of you are accompanying us," Dottie happily said as Arya simply looked back out the window with a huff. "Back to what I was saying," Dottie said as she turned back to Naruto. "This visit is not just to decide the future of Veyfate," the Lilim said, and before Naruto could voice his confusion she continued. "If Veyfate has such a powerful grip on the surrounding countries, then how do you think they will side in this war after the negotiations are finished?" the woman asks Naruto. "They would side with whoever Veyfate does out of fear," Naruto realized with gritted teeth. "Very good," Dottie praised the boy. "Though fortunately for the two of you you need not worry too much. You're only here to observe the negotiations and learn from this. Since Arya has been chosen as the royal family's representative in your world, she need to be more prepared for political disputes, even more so than was planned." Dottie reminds them whether Arya was paying attention to their conversation or not. "And to a lesser extent you need to be educated in politics as well, seeing as you are her chosen partner," Dottie tells the boy, who groans at the thought. Wait, are you saying Naruto knows how to talk politics?" Sakura asks very skeptically, interrupting Arya. "Technically, yes, though to what extent is certainly arguable," the Lilim says with a bit of annoyance in her voice at being interrupted so suddenly. "Now where was I?" Arya asks with a small sigh. "Welcome, I hope your journey was alright." A man in his late 30s with well-groomed black hair with strp of grey in it and wearing a butler's outfit greeted the group as they walked up to the large front doors of the castle built into the side of the mountain, with their carriages stopped not far behind them and large walls of stone blocking the full force of the blizzard raging around them. "It was uneventful but safe," Dottie tells the man. Along with the passengers of her carriage there was also a Baphomet with pure white fur and holding a staff far taller than herself with a sideways eye-like shape at the top with an orange gem floating in the canter of the opening. Next to her stood an Inari with hair so black that her ears and nun-swaying tails would blend in perfectly with the inky blackness of the blizzard if not for the light coming from the castle shining off her appealing fur. Behind the two women were two men Naruto assumed were their husbands or simply there to keep their needs satisfied while on the journey carrying their luggage. "Are we the first group to arrive?" Dottie's male companion asked the man that was standing out in this weather for who knows how long in order to greet them. "No, the Order's representatives arrived early in the afternoon," the man informs them. Seeing the looks on his and Dottie's faces he then adds, "You have nothing to fear. They have not seen the king yet. As per the agreement he will not speak with either side until the day after both have safely reached the castle." "Good, then let us get out of this weather," the Baphomet said as she started walking towards the door. "I must agree. Spending so much time in that carriage has left me with a few stressed muscles. Nothing a good night's rest shouldn't cure, however," the Inari said with a small stretch as she motioned to the men behind her to follow with one of her tails. "I will show you to your living quarters for your time here," the butler spoke with a short bow before heading over to have the imposing doors opened. Later that night. "I can't sleep," Naruto thought to himself as he laid in bed while staring up at the stone roof. The heavy winds outside left the slight hint of a cold breeze in the old room despite it being furnished to fit any royal, and he was positive that it had started to hail as well, judging by the sound of ice hitting the window. Looking beside him, the blonde found it a bit annoying that Arya was sleeping so peaceful despite finding her exceedingly cute snuggled up next to him. I'm sure no one will mind if I just walk around until I'm tired, Naruto thought with a smile at his plan as he ever so gently slipped out of Arya's grasp and out of bed as to not awaken the girl. With that done, the blonde found it amusing at how Arya started unconsciously reaching out for her lost warmth with an annoyed expression before giving up and wrapping herself tightly with the blanket. It feels like this place is haunted instead of being someone's home, Naruto said to himself as a shiver went down his spine while walking through the large hallways with a candle as his only source of light. Walking along, the blonde saw a corner up ahead that to his surprise seemed to have a source of light on the other side. Picking up the pace slightly out of curiosity, the blonde soon turned the corner to find a girl 4, maybe 5, years older than him holding a candle that was the source of light he had noticed. Taking in her appearance, the blonde saw that she wore a sleeveless white top with blue stripes making up the sides with matching pants and high-laced boots that came up just past her mid-shin. Over that she had a white cloak pinned together over her right shoulder, and white gloves covering her hands. Her eyes were a dazzling amber color, her face showed flawless skin full of youth and life, and her vibrant shoulder-length violet hair beautifully framed her face. Letting out a sigh of relief as she held her right hand over her heart while her left held up her candle, and with her eyes locking with Naruto, softly spoke with a warm smile, "Sorry, I wasn't expecting anyone else to be up right now and ended up being scared half to death." Stretching out her right hand to the boy now that her heart had settled down, she introduced herself, "My name is Ray Craft. May I know the name of the boy I've met undoubtedly by the Lord's divine intervention this night?" Letting out a sigh of relief as she held her right hand over her heart while her left held up her candle, and with her eyes locking with Naruto, softly spoke with a warm smile, "Sorry, I wasn't expecting anyone else to be up right now and ended up being scared half to death." Stretching out her right hand to the boy now that her heart had settled down, she introduced herself, "My name is Ray Craft. May I know the name of the boy I've met undoubtedly by the Lord's divine intervention this night?" "Oh, I'm Naruto Uzumaki." "Nice to meet cha," the young blonde enthusiastically told the girl he'd nearly run over as he reached out and took her hand in his own smaller one. "Naruto, HM. First time I've heard the name," Ray commented as she closed her eyes in thought. "I like it," the girl said as she reopened her eyes. Leaning down to be at eye level with the blonde, "Now, Naruto, would you mind telling me what you're doing wandering the halls late at night? It's dangerous with the monsters lurking about," Ray asked him with a gentle smile. Monsters?" the blonde asked, the color leaving his face as images of grotesque monstrosities entered his mind. "Oh," Ray tilted her head as she saw the young boy tremble slightly. "Yes, the castle has been invaded by horrible creatures that seek to spread their foul corruption," the holly woman said as slipped her hand out of Naruto's and used her now free arms to pull the blonde into her embrace. "Do not fear, we have come to ensure that their influence does not spread further. I'd lay down my life before I allowed such horrid things to harm an innocent child like yourself," Ray comforted as she soothingly rubbed his back while resting her head gentle atop his. "Who said I'm scared?" Naruto blurted out as he pushed himself away from Ray slightly, looking up at her face in the process. "I'm a shinobi in training. Dealing with a few monsters is nothing," the blonde told her with a determined expression, despite the few trembles here and there. "Shinobi, huh?" Ray said as she tried to figure out if she'd ever heard the word before. "Then, perhaps a strong, brave shinobi like you could walk with me for a bit. It would put my nerves at ease," Ray told the blonde. Well," Naruto began as he thought about it. "I guess I can go with ya," the blonde said with a big smile. "It makes me happy to hear that," the holly woman told him as she stood back up. "Now, would you be so kind as to tell me where your room is?" Ray asked the blonde as she took his hand in hers once more. "Sure. It's this way," Naruto excitedly told her as he started pulling her arm in the direction he had come from. Roughly 20 uneventful minutes later. "Here it is, I think," Naruto told his new friend as he came to a stop in front of the cold, uninviting doors of his and Arya's room. "I guess this is where we part ways then," Ray told the blonde as she pulled her hand out of his. "Wah! But weren't we going to explore the castle?" Naruto asked, disappointed that she was only going to take him back to his room. When did I say we'd do that? Ray asked the blonde with a smile, making him puff up his cheeks in a pout. Don't worry, the girl told him as she ruffled up his hair. I'll be staying at the castle for a while, so we're sure to meet again, Ray told him before taking her hand back and reaching behind her. In the meantime, I'd like you to have this, the holy mage said as she pulled out a rosary and handed it out to him. Keep this on you at all times. It's rosary that I crafted myself and then imbued it with the Lord's purifying power. With this, those monsters won't be able to lay a hand on you, Ray assured the blonde who gleefully took her gift. Thanks. You're a real life-saver, you know, Naruto excitedly told the girl as he held on to the rosary. There's no need to say that. Knowing my work will keep innocent souls safe is enough, Ray said as she turned to head down the corridor. Try not to get into any trouble, the woman called back as candlelight slowly shrank as she walked away. Even if she says that, the blonde began to say aloud as he opened the door. I'm still not teared at all, Naruto complained to himself as he made his way over to the bed. Slipping his shoes off and managing to pull enough of the blanket out of Arya's grasp to cover himself without waking the girl, Naruto began to stare up at the ceiling as he waited for sleep to take him. Well, that was the plan at least. Just as expected, it wasn't long before Arya's hands unconsciously sought out her blonde love. Though the demon's lord's daughter was quickly brought out of her dreams as the rosary Ray had left with Naruto reacted to her touch. Kaiwa, the young Lilim yelled out as she jumped from the bed, holding her hands close to her chest. Arya. Naruto panicked as he too jumped out of bed and ran over to the cursing girl. Are you ALRI? Naruto was asking when Arya snapped at him. What the hell is going on, Naruto? Is this some prank you thought would be funny? Arya demanded as she shook her hands, trying to ignore the dull throbbing left over from the initial shock. She was about to go into a tirade when a faint glow around the confused blonde's neck caught her attention. Naruto, where did you get that? Arya asked in an almost uncomfortably calm tone as she glared at the rosary as if she were trying to destroy the object with that alone. Huh? A confused blonde looked down at his new gift and then back up at the princess. This? Naruto asked as he pointed at the rosary before answering the girl's question. This really kind girl I ran into while walking around the castle gave it to me to keep monsters away. Pretty cool, huh? Resisting the urge to tear her hair out, Arya settled for pinching the bridge of her nose in exasperation. Naruto, Arya calmly and slowly said to the obviously oblivious blonde she'd fallen in love with. Do you, just so happen, to recall what monsters are in this world? Arya asked the blonde, her eyes firmly held shut as she tried to fight off an oncoming headache while spreading out her wings in an attempt to help him figure it out. Monsters are, Naruto was saying while in thought before his expression of thought turned to one of realization. Ah. I'm sorry, Arya. Are you alright? Naruto said, his worry returning in full force as he went to check on the girl. You dumbass. Arya yelled as she started backing up from the approaching blonde. Get rid of that thing before you come any closer. Arya shouted at the blonde. In a dimly lit room of a separate wing of the castle, a man with long black hair that seemed to grow into a dark gray as it traveled down his back sat at the room's desk, his back facing the door. Opening his coal black eyes as the flickering light of a candle danced across his face, the man began to speak. Were you able to locate it? The softly spoken words escaped his lips as he sat there staring into the candle's flame. Forgive me, father, but I wasn't able to find the piece, Ray apologized to the man as she stood in front of the door. The warm gentle expression she had while talking with the young blonde was no longer there, instead she stood there with an almost professional face and posture. I see, the man said as a few strands of his hair fell in front of his face. It's unlikely the negotiations will be settled quickly. Get some rest and we'll continue the search tomorrow, the man instructed her, and with a short bow the girl exited the room. Back with Naruto and Arya. I said I saw sorry. So why are you tying me to the bed? Naruto asked Arya as she finished securing the last bit of rope to the bed, now worried for himself rather than the Lilim. Naruto, 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 Arya said with a mischievous tone as she pulled on the rope to test the tension. It takes a lot of energy to keep such perfect skin from being ruined by that little mistake of yours, Arya told him with a smirk as held up her right hand while inspecting it. Of course, I need a little pick-me-up after that and you're going to give it to me, Arya playfully told the blonde as her left hand slid up his leg headed for the hem of his pajama bottom. What the hell is this? Sakura yelled out, interrupting the Lilim's story as her Ino and Sasuke stared at her with blushes of varying degrees. What is it now? I'm never going to be able to get to the end if you keep interrupting me, Arya said, growing annoyed with the girl. What is it now? What is it now? Sakura repeated as she stood up to stare down at the Lilim, the spring's water now flowing down her naked body. You're barely old enough for SSEC as it is and you're telling me you were doing that back then? Sakura questioned as she leveled an accusing finger at the girl. Of course, Arya told the girl as she reached up and gently lowered the pinket's hand. Our first time was a few weeks after we first met, Arya told Sakura with a warm smile as she started recalling their first time in her head while Sakura and Ino just stared at her in disbelief. He, if you saw us go at it now you'd probably doubt how awful we were at making love our first time. So awkward and messy, Arya told them as the fond memories flooded her mind. I'd be more than happy to tell you about it some other time, but I already have a story to tell and we don't really need the distraction right now, Arya told them as Sakura slowly sat back down, having given up on talking reason to this girl. Now, if you don't want to listen to this part then simply don't. I'll be telling it regardless of what you say, the white-haired girl told them. I'm liking what I see, Arya said in her best stuck voice after yanking down the blonde's pants to see his hardening manhood. Does being tied up get you all excited? The girl asked as she lightly racked her nails across his bare skin. Gah, this is humiliating, Naruto grumbled as he avoided looking at the girl or his fully hard Urken. He could probably get out of this if he put all of his effort into it, but there wasn't any doubt in his mind that Arya would just come up with something worse if he did. It wouldn't be much of a punishment if it wasn't, now would it? Arya said as she ran her fingers lightly up and down the blonde's trembling member. Where did you even come up with this idea? Naruto asked as he had to keep his hands from unconsciously pull at their binds due to Arya's gentle touch making his body scream for more. Well, Arya started as she suddenly tightened her grip on Naruto's member, making him jump at the brief, but excruciating pain. I know you aren't the biggest fan of spying on others while in the throes of passion, Arya said in a slightly dramatized manner. But I find it to be quite an interesting hobby. You wouldn't believe what I've witnessed while seeking around the royal palace, Arya told him as she tenderly stroked Naruto's manhood as it now throbbed from more than just the blood flowing through it. I was going to ask if you wanted to try something like this out anyway but this just gives me an excuse to force you to try it, the girl told him. You're evil, you know that, Naruto told the girl before he had to hold in a scream as she dug her nails into the base of his. Of course, I've never actually tried this out before so you'll just have to put up with my inexperience for now, the Lilim told him with a sweat smile playing across her lips. Oh, don't be like that, Arya told him as she reached up to wipe away the tears forming in the corners of Naruto's eyes. I'll make the pain all worth it, the girl told him as she pulled her hand back and leaned down. You know I'd never put you through anything you couldn't handle, Arya said as she held the blonde's member against his cheek while looking into his face. Arya, Naruto lightly as Arya stroked his manhood with her velvet-like fingers before reflexively jerking his hips as he felt her tongue run up the bottom of his Urken. Does that feel good? Arya asked with a stuck smirk as she began to use the palm of her hand to pleasure the head of his pages. You're so adorable squirming helplessly under my touch, Arya told him before returning to lathering the lower half of his with her saliva. Ariga, if you keep doing that, Naruto was saying as he couldn't stop his hips from shaking when Arya pulled away. Wah? Naruto questioned as he watched the girl lap up the pre-juice coating the palm of her hand. Why, whatever do you have that pitiful expression for? Arya asked with a giggle as she finished cleaning her hand. Naruto was about to voice his complaint when the sensation of Arya's tail wrapping tightly around his base shot through him. "I wonder how long you can last," Arya offhandedly commented as she leaned down once more and took the head of Naruto's member into her mouth, making the blonde squirm as she used her tongue to toy with him. What do you think you're doing?" Naruto managed to get out as the build-up from before started to creep back, only to be halted by the girl's tail. Arya chose to ignore the blonde's pleas however as she started the process of ever so slowly moving down Naruto's, making sure that the blonde's erratic hip movements didn't speed up the process. After several long minutes of her slow descent marked by pauses for her to regain her breath, Arya's lips had finally made contact with her tail. At this point the blonde had stopped trying to reason with her and had resigned himself to whatever she had in store for him. Having all of Naruto's member but the part her tail was coiled around on her mouth, Arya began to hum around it while she started to wring her tail around his base without letting up on the pressure. Jerking his head up, Naruto was met with Arya looking into his eyes with what he assumed was the best smirk she could manage. Much to the boy's displeasure, Arya had also started to force his hips flat against the bed with her hands so that only the vibrations of her humming and her tail were the only sources of pleasure he had. "Damn it, Arya. I can't take it anymore." Naruto got out through gritted teeth as his built-up CLMX could no longer be fully held back by the girl's tail and his juice began to slip past it. Arya had at first tried to keep up the humming but quickly decided against it after nearly choking on the blonde's juice, leaving her tail to do all the work as she swallowed the thick white juice that slipped past. As much as he was relieved to finally have an orgasm, Naruto found the sensation hollow. A nagging in the back of his head made him well aware that all of that build-up was met with perhaps the most unsatisfying CLMX he's ever experienced. A nagging that told him it could have been better and left him cursing Arya's tail as it finally let go of his member, allowing a few final drops of juice to leak out. Well, he'd been punished enough, right? Surely she'd let him go at it like normal now. "Night, Naruto, see you in the morning," Arya said as she snuggled up next to the blonde while pulling the covers over herself. "Wait, you're just going to leave me like this?" Naruto asked as he tugged at his bindings with his manhood that hadn't entirely settled down. His complaints were met with the sound of Arya's light breathing. Whether she had actually fallen asleep that quickly or was just pretending was something Naruto would never figure out, but that was how the blonde spent the rest of the night, bound, corny, and cold. "That insufferable man, I'll have his head on a pike by the end of this," a woman, clearly on nobility by her ardor and way of carrying herself, said aloud as her and her group moved further into the castle. Her long black hair fell in a single thick braid behind her that reached down to her knees with two short bangs, in comparison to the rest of her hair, framing her face as her amber eyes clearly displayed her irritation. "Your father has never been an easy man to deal with, but I hadn't expected him to have armed guards stop us at the front door," a man walking alongside her donned in high-class forest green robes said with a hint of weariness to his words, his long silvery hair flowing behind him. "The sooner the man dies the sooner we can get on with our lives," the woman said before quickly turning around. "Kyoko, you are not to leave the children's side under any circumstances," the woman ordered. A kunoichi with a green and black revealing outfit, narrow green eyes, and short black hair that ended just past her pointed ears. "I won't let them out of my sight, Lady Elizabeth," Kyoko responded as her placed a hand over her heart with a shallow bow. "If it's so dangerous then why did you bring us in the first place?" a boy about Naruto's age, maybe a year older, asked, the boredom clear in his voice as he walked along with his arms folded behind his messy white hair. "Your sister insisted that she come along with us, and it didn't feel right if we brought just one of you," the boy's father said as he looked over his shoulder at the children. "Besides, your grandfather is just puffing up his chest with all the guards. It's not as dangerous as your mother says," the man said with a smile. Looking over to his sister, "Can't you do anything normal?" "You're the creepiest girl I've ever known," the boy said to the girl as he fixed his light gray-blue eyes on her and was met with golden orbs staring right back. "I simply want to be present as mother and father speak with grandfather," Loona, her older brother. "As next in line for the throne you really should be taking more of an interest in this. Even this far from home the results of the debate could have a large impact on our country," the young girl said with a smirk that sent a shiver down her brother's spine. "I'm sure Mom and Dad will handle it no matter who gains control of this frozen dump," the boy said as he jerked his head back forward as his arms dropped to his sides. You're a bum who's grown lazy off of your royal BLD. Take responsibility for your heritage or step down and allow someone more fitting of the position to take your place, Loona bluntly said as she looked forward as well aware of the glare that was being sent her way by the boy. Kyoko, take the children to our room. We'll go speak with the king, Loona's mother told the woman as the group came to a split in the corridor. Am I to assume it's the same room as always? Kyoko asked, and after receiving a nod her and the children turned down the other corridor as the parents and two of Kyoko's subordinates continued on. Naruto and Aria's room. Someone will come to get you in the afternoon, so please don't get into any trouble, Dottie told the two as she stood in the doorway with her hand on the handle before closing the door and leaving them to themselves. Several long minutes of silence later, you know, this is going to be a lot more boring than need be if you refuse to talk to me, Aria told the blonde with her arms folded as the two of them sat next to each other on the bed. Still not receiving a response as the blonde stared off into space, the Lilim's irritation quickly grew. Jumping off the bed and turning on the spot, Aria looked the blonde in the eye as she practically shouted, if you're expecting an apology then you can forget it. I refuse to do so. After her little outburst the girl turned around once more and stormed out of the room, leaving the blonde sitting on the bed staring at the door. No, I will not chase after her. That's what she wants, Naruto thought to himself as his resolve to do just that was slowly crumbling. No wonder this place smells worse than before, someone filled it with trash, a woman with extremely short green hair said with a sneer as she entered the room, her eyes narrowed at the Demon Realm's envoy who were already sitting at the large oval-shaped ring that made up the table they'd be spending a lot of time at. Behind her shimmering white armor entered her associates. The first was an elderly man that seemed to defiantly hold on to that last spark of youth as he walked into the room with a skip to his step. His garb distinguished him as one of the church's officials. Next to the old man walked what could only be described as the standard fairy tale hero with his heavy set of armor, the finest grade sword sheathed at his hip, a body covered in fine muscle from a lifetime of training, and was easily the tallest of his group. And lastly, entering after everyone else was Rei's father, an indiscernible expression on his face as he scanned the room. The place didn't stink until you entered the room, Elizabeth retorted as her and her husband took up their own corner of the table, one very close to the elevated throne reserved for the king. I didn't expect to see your ugly mug here, the female knight said as her sneer was redirected to the woman. Were you not disowned? The woman spoke with a smirk. Not on paper, no, Elizabeth retorted, clearly annoyed with this knight. As such, I have every right to be here as you backstabbing lot do, Elizabeth told the woman. Backstabbing, the woman barked out as her hand went to her sword. I ought to cut you heretic head right off from your shoulders. You foul blasphemer, the woman shouted before she was halted by the elderly man's arm blocking her path. Calm down Cheryl, the man told his companion as he directed his gaze into her eyes. But Cheryl tried to argue but was silenced once more. I agreed to allow you on this mission because you swore you'd behave yourself. Regardless of what you believe, Elizabeth here has every right to be angry with us. It was the order that cut off her trade routes and nearly bankrupted her country, mind you, the man told her. Humph. It's the least monster-loving heathens deserve, Cheryl said with a huff as she pushed the old man's hand down and made her way over to the table. That's not what we're here to debate. Keep your mind focused lest you damage the order's chances of canning a new foothold, Rei's father advised the woman as he took a seat next to her. He's right, you know, the male knight said as he took the other seat next to her. Just put up with it for now, the man said as he examined their competition, particularly Dottie who had been watching their exchange with a smirk. Well, I'm feeling confident. Who about you girls? Dottie says, looking over at her white and black furred companions. The odds do feel like they're in our favor, the Inari purred, her tail swishing behind her. It'll be easy, the girl like Baphomet confidently said as she stretched her arms up and folded them behind her head. Nothing here either, Rei though to herself with a small grimace as she made her way to the library's entrance with nothing to show for her search. Exiting the large room she didn't even pay the two guards any mind, their eyes still clouded by her magic and her presence affected them as much as a breeze slipping into the castle through its old stone walls. Feeling something scurry up her leg, Rei glances down to see one of her familiars, a magically constructed rat, make its way up to her shoulder. "So you finished your search as well," the girl said with a smile as she reached up with her hand to scratch the creature's head. "Did you find anything?" Rei asks and then waits as the rat went to her ear before breaking down into the base magic used to create it and slips in. Once the animal is finished entering her head, Rei lets out a disappointed sigh. "Guess we both didn't have any luck," the holy mage breaths out as she lightly shakes her head, shifting through the rat's memories. "Rei," the girl heard her name being called out from behind her. Turning around at the young voice, Rei was pleasantly surprised to see the boy she had met the night before running down the hall towards her. "I see the Lord has chosen to reunite us. How are you, Naruto?" Rei asked the boy as she came to a skidding halt in front of her. "Oh, I'm Yum," Naruto was going to answer with the usual great or fine when what Arya did to him last night entered his mind and his legs unconsciously moved to shelter his manhood. "I could be better," the young blonde said, not wanting to tell anyone about what happened. "Well, I hope your day improves," Rei tells him with a warm smile, only for that smile to falter slightly as she notices something missing. "Naruto," Rei starts, startling the blonde with her sterner tone. "Where is the rosary I gave you?" "It's dangerous to wander around without protection," Rei tells the boy as she kneels down to be eye level with him, her voice more gentle but still maintained a degree of sternness. "Oh, that?" Naruto says as his worried expression turned into a grin. "Arya didn't like it, so I put it away," the young blonde tells the holy woman as his arms came up to rest behind his head. Why wouldn't she like the rosary?" Rei questioned, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Because it hurts her," Naruto bluntly and honestly answers her question. Remaining quiet, Rei stood back up and took a few steps forward in thought, ending up behind the boy. "And, where is this friend of yours now?" Rei asks, glancing over her shoulder at the blonde who was doing the same. "That," the blonde started as he turned his head forward as he shrugged his shoulders, his arms coming back down to rest at his sides. "I don't know. She took off a while ago and now I'm trying to find her," Naruto says as he spins around to look at the woman, noticing her right hand falling to her side but giving it now further thought. "Well, that's not good. It would be horrible if she ended up lost in the vast castle halls," Rei remarks, her warm smile back in place. Looking at the blonde who nodded in agreement, "Would it be okay if I asked a few questions about your friend, Arya?" Blinking back at her, Naruto eventually shrugged, "I guess you can." Giving a slight nod as she continued to smile, Rei began, "How long have you known her?" 2 years. "And she's a monster?" "Yeah." "What sort of monster?" "Lilin, I think." "And where did you meet?" "Her mom's palace." Taking in the information, Rei glanced to the side as she thought it over. This boy, his mere existence shouldn't be possible, the purple-haired mage thought to herself as she turned her gaze to her right hand. I wasn't able to detect a hint of corruption in his body. Even the strongest-willed and purest champions in the Order's history would be irreversibly tainted simply setting foot in the royal demon realm where the demon lord's palace resides. Turning her sight back to the boy, could he be immune to the demon's power? The very thought itself made her heart skip a beat. Are you okay?" "You're just staring at things and it's starting to feel weird," Naruto says, pulling the girl from her thoughts. "Oh, forgive me," Rei apologizes after her eyes widen slightly. Had she really been staring long enough for him to make such a statement? "I was just trying to recall if I had seen a Lilin before, but I'm afraid I can't point you in any directions," Rei lies without a second of hesitation. "Aw man," the young blonde pouts at the news before his eyes widen with an idea. "Hey! Why don't you help me look for her?" Naruto suggests with a big goofy grin, making the holy woman blink in surprise at the proposal. Her surprise turning into another smile, "I was just about to suggest the same thing. It wouldn't do to have 2 young lives wandering aimlessly," Rei happily tells the blonde. "Why don't you take the lead, and I'll follow?" Rei says as the boy cheered at having her stick around longer. "Sure. This way," the young blonde excitedly cheered as he turned and started heading down the corridor. Behind him, Ray followed at a slower pace, but fast enough to keep up with the boy. With the blonde's back turned, Ray's familiar slipped back out of her ear and scurried down her back and leg, set on continuing the search in its MSTR's place. How dare that idiot ignore me? Me of all people. His adorable bride and daughter of the demon lord herself. Arya ranted with a pout as she stormed through the vast hallways of the castle, not caring for the direction she went. If he thinks his punishment was so bad, then I'll just make the next one dwarf it. Ha! What do you say to that, you dummy? Jityu Naruto, you stupid dummy face. Arya plotted with a devious expression before her face scrunched up as she worked her brain for an appropriate insult, before finally settling with what she blurted out, her hands being thrown into the air as she did so. Coming to a stop in front of a small window coated in so much snow that barely any light filtered through, Arya's small body slowly relaxed as her angry expression faltered into a saddened expression. Naruto! You idiot! Arya softly spoke as her arms moved to wrap around herself. Despite all the warmth provided by the magic in her clothes, the young princess felt cold as she stood all alone in that empty hallway. Above her, sitting within a sizable crack in the old stone wall, was a rat with its pitch-black eyes watching her every move. As it sat there, the flesh hidden beneath the dark gray fur of its back started to shift and bubble before forcing the creature to hunch over as a blob of flesh burst out. Slowly shifting and forming itself, the mass grew limbs, claws, and teeth as it finally split off from the main body as a nearly fully formed duplicate. After a minuscule moment longer, the clone had completely formed before taking off into the inky blackness of the hole in the wall, leaving the main body behind to keep an eye on the girl. Within the negotiation chamber, both sides sat in uneasy silence. For an hour now they had been left to sit by themselves. The king of Veyfate had yet to present himself before them, and so they had little choice but to wait, and wait, and wait. Unbelievable. Cheryl huffed out as she sat in her cold, iron chair with her eyes never leaving the enemy before her for a moment. The Lilin was composed. The Baphomet had started fidgeting around in her seat soon after the silence fell over the room, with the fox sitting next to her being the only thing keeping the childlike fiend from getting out of her seat and running around, and the man accompanying the monster princess was just as composed as the Lilin. The man calls for us at his castle, on his schedule, and he has the gal to keep us waiting. It's insulting, the green-haired knight spat as her armored hands folded over her chest. It's precisely because it's his castle and his schedule that we can't do anything but wait, her fellow knight reminded her as he turned his head to the side to look at her. Imagine if we weren't here when he finally arrives. It would come across as an insult, the hero proposed. And it's not an insult to keep your guests waiting. Cheryl argued through grit teeth as she glared at Dottie, who sat across from her with her cool and composed expression still plastered over her face. It's pathetic, the woman hissed. As the Make Knight pondered over what he could say to quell the growing temper of his companion, Ray's father spoke up. The entire hour they'd been sitting there he had simply chose to sit in silence with his arms crossed and his eyes held shut. Is it? His question finally got Cheryl to turn her gaze away from the monsters sitting across from them. I don't need your bullshit, Norman, the woman snapped at the man. Then you can choose not to listen, Norman spoke as he opened his eyes. But for argument's sake, assume that we haven't been sitting here for nothing, that there is a purpose behind it. You're overthinking things, Cheryl said as she waved him off. And it's that overthinking of his that has kept me safe on more than one occasion, the heroic knight sitting beside her said with a stern look directed at her before it softened and his gaze moved past Cheryl to look at Norman. Please, brother, do tell us what you're thinking, the man requested. Yes, do tell. It would certainly be more entertaining than continuing to sit here in silence, the holy man of the church responded as he too turned his attention to Norman. If you insist, then I shall, Norman began. We were all called here as representatives for our respective factions. So that would lead one to assume that we are the best suited for this role. If we, who are meant to be the best, fail to impress, then what would that say about the rest of our forces? And if we aren't the best, then that would bring into question why we were sent in the best's place, Norman put forth. Yeah. That's why we came all the way out to this frozen wasteland to dance around for some old geezer with a crown, Cheryl added in an annoyed tone. Unfortunately we can't prance around for a king who won't show up, Cheryl added, her annoyance growing with the second. Yes. We are indeed here to put on a good show. But that is just as it sounds, a show. A show can be fabricated from half-truths and lies. So the question is how to tell truth from lies. It's a problem with many potential solutions, but one answer would be to put us all into a room to see how we behave. Am I correct, Your Majesty? Norman finished as he turned his gaze to the throne, an act that the rest of the room soon followed. Before the eyes of all gathered, the space around the chair shifted and bent before the image of the king sitting upon his throne came into view like a mirage flickering in and out of existence. His long, full white hair flowed out of the bottom of his decadent crown made of solid gold and embedded with only the finest of rare jewels. His eyebrows were thick and unkempt as they hung over gray orbs. His facial hair was thick and hid his neck and lower face from view, leaving only the skin of his upper face visible in all of its deeply wrinkled and leathery glory. The many layer of clothing he garbed himself in was rich in deep violets and lined with the finest of white furs and made discerning his build a near impossibility. Quicker than I expected of children, his voice was heavy with age, but despite that it held a sense of absolute authority. His eyes passed over them like he was disinterested in this whole affair, and yet even his uninterested gaze pierced through those present. With just a simple glance it was easy for the king to tell that Norman was the only one unsurprised by his presence. With a humph, the king rested his cheek on his gloved hand, thoroughly unimpressed with those in front of him. Very well, you may begin. Gah! Every hallway looks the same. Naruto groaned in frustration, and he and Ray passed by the same crooked torch holder that they'd seen 2 times before. I'm sure it's easy for those living here, Ray said with a reassuring smile. For the past hour she and Naruto had been wandering the castle, in circles as it would seem. That doesn't help us at all. Naruto blurted out as he spun around to look up at the older girl. They had run across a handful of castle workers while wandering about, but all of them had been skittish and chose to duck out of sight or acted like they weren't there when talked to. So in short, they weren't going to get any help out of the locals. Nothing to be done about it, Ray said with a smallest of sighs. We'll just have to keep pushing forward, Kay, the teen told the young blonde as she leaned over and patted his head. It was something she kept doing whenever Naruto got frustrated, and the first couple of times Naruto just swatted her hand away and continued to barrel forward with pure determination. Now he just expected that this was something she'd do and didn't bother pushing the gesture away. Right. Naruto cheered as he pumped his fist into the air. I don't care how long it takes, I'm gonna find Arya, the blonde declared as he turned and took off down the hall. As he did so he failed to notice the small creature moving around on Ray's shoulder, partially hidden by her purple locks. The rat that poked its head out soon demilitarized into mana and slipped into its MSTR's body. As she walked after the energetic blonde, Ray's soft, caring expression morphed into one that was cold and analytical as she brought up the hand that she had on Naruto's head. It's too soon to find your companion. There's so much to be learned before then, Ray muttered to herself as she stared at the magical seal in the palm of her hand that shifted and wavered in response to the boy directly ahead of her. And so we get to stare at stone walls all day. Great, the young prince drawled as he lay in his sparse bed, his gaze locked onto the cold ceiling above him. After separating from their parents, both he and his little sister had been led to this spare room by their temporary guardian, Kyoko. So says the noble playing the role of a street rat, Loona remarked from her place sitting on the edge of the bed. She was perfectly content reading one of the books she'd brought with her, even if she'd much rather prefer to be present at the negotiations. It was simply cruel fate that left her unable to attend directly because of her young age. So says the little girl pretending to be an adult, her brother shot back as he rolled over so that his back was facing the dual hair-colored girl. Geez, it's like I'm the only normal one around here, the boy muttered. He was sure Loona heard him, but she made no indication that she had, and so the room fell into an uncomfortable silence, or at least it was uncomfortable for him. Standing over by the door, Kyoko stood guard over the 2 adolescents. She was head of the royal guard, and as such it was only obvious that she'd lead the team assigned to their protection during this trip. Their safety was her top priority, and nothing would cause them harm while she still breathed. That was her sworn. Wait. 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 Sakura interjected with an arm covering her small mounds while her free arm flailed about. Letting out a sigh, Arya leveled a hard look at the Pinkett with an annoyed look on her face. What is it now? The Lilim asked. We're going to be here forever if you keep interrupting, Kurenai remarked. She could live without hearing the end of this story, but seeing how enraptured Hinata was, she figured the girl was staying and she wasn't about to leave her in a mixed hot spring. I know. Sakura all but shouted before pointing an accusing finger at the monster princess, but how the hell do you expect us to believe the parts you weren't there for? But I was there, Arya told her with a bemused expression. Sakura looked skeptical, but the Lilim simply waved it off. If you'd just let me continue. The sound of the door creaking open drew the attention of the room's inhabitants. Prince chose not to do anything, trusting Kyoko to handle any sort of danger, with Luna lazily glancing up from her book. Kyoko had already drawn her weapon and prepared to strike, however it was not an armored soldier of castle servant as she expected, but a young girl staring blankly into the room from the now open doorway. A girl with pure white hair, wings, and tail along with black horns and deep red eyes. Wrong room. Arya nervously stammered as she stood there nearly frozen stiff on the spot. She had planned on returning to her room where Naruto was after her brief walk, and in no way after she'd calmed down from a temper tantrum, but when she went to retrace her steps she ended up lost her, temporarily forgetting her location. Raising an eyebrow, Luna remarked, obviously, before returning to her book. Man, so annoying, the prince muttered as he stretched out his limbs and started to flip over so he was facing the door. What sort of idiot goes and gets Loo-ho-host? The boy was remarking when his eyes landed on the Lilim. Upon seeing her flawless visage his words died in his throat momentarily as he stared slack-jawed at the creature before him. You're starting to drool, Luna told him with a sideways glance, brining the boy back to reality as he snapped his mouth shut and hopped out of bed. Ignore her if you please. She doesn't know what she's talking about, the prince said as he strolled up to the pretty girl with a wide grin spreading across his face, all the while Arya was giving him an annoyed look. And just what were you muttering over there, HM? I must be hearing things because it almost sounded like you were in the middle of calling me an ED-, Arya was saying, hands placed on her hips when the prince cut her off with a series of nervous laughs. Ahahaha me? Call you an idiot? Heavens no. Strike the very thought from your mind, my fair maiden, the boy told her while making overly grand gestures with his arms. If I said anything at all it must have been the ramblings of a man coming out of a deep, restful slumber. The trip here was long and so I simply had to rest my body upon arrival, the boy reasoned before his sister drew an annoyed "kek" from the boy simply by saying, dumbass, without tearing her eyes away from her book. He you're a real joker huh sis, the boy remarked as he shakily turned his head to send a quick glare at the girl, his big grin never leaving his face. Quickly turning his gaze back to Arya he saw her looking at him with a face of bewilderment. Not his preferred expression, but it was better than having her angry with him. Where are my manners? My name is Stanmore Ludwig Ishikawa. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Stanmore introduced with a short bow. Arya. Just Arya will be fine enough, Arya gave her name with a forced smile. She just wanted to get back to her Naruto, not deal with some weirdo. Arya. Ah, what a appealing name. I shall remember it always, Stanmore declared as he reached out to take one of Arya's hands into his own, only for the girl to easily avoid him with a back step. Yes, well, thank you, the Lilim remarked while trying to come across as friendly as she could. Meanwhile Stanmore made his best attempt as coming off as cool while pulling his empty hands back to himself. You're one of the Demon Lord's children, are you not? Kyoko asked. Even if one didn't know what the individual members of the royal family looked, it was common knowledge that they all shared similar features. Kyoko wasn't familiar with the name, but this girl was without a doubt a Lilim. Turning to the woman, who was still holding her dagger despite not having it in a position to strike out, Arya placed her hands back on her hips as she puffed up her chest. That is correct. I am indeed a daughter of the Demon Lord. Moving her right hand up to her face, she continued as she flipped a strand of white hair out of the way while putting on a smug smile, the appealing, elegant, smart, and all-around amazing Arya. Yes, of course. Kyoko finally responded as the young girl held her pose. She had sometimes wondered what a member of the royal family would be like, and this wasn't among her expectations. So she's a tad bit arrogant. So what? No way am I going to let such a cutie slip through my grasp. Stanmore thought to himself with a fist tightened with determination inches from his face. Of course. You're obviously a princess among princesses. And as such you deserve a prince among Pringal. Stanmore was in the middle of proclaiming that the corner of a rather thick book found its way to the back of his skull. And what is a daughter of the Demon Lord doing in a place like this? You're a bit young to be a part of the negotiations, Loona asked as she pulled her hand back, her book firmly gripped in her tinny hand. She found the height difference between her and her brother annoying from time to time, but at least she could reach the base of his skull if she got on her tiptoes. And you're even younger than me. Your point? Arya replied with a question of her own as her proud/smug expression was quickly replaced with a sideways glare. Is it odd for me to be in my grandfather's castle? Loona asked. It was in fact odd for her given how close her parents were with the old king, but Arya had no need to know that. Grandfather? Arya questioned with a raised eyebrow before quickly pushing her curiosity to the side with a shake of her head. Forget it, Arya said as she turned to leave. I have somewhere to be, so I'll be taking my Leah dash, the girl was saying when Stanmore rushed out of the room ahead of her, the bump on the back of his head he'd been nursing forgotten as he puffed out his chest with pride. And where are we going? The boy asked. No. Not we, just me. I don't need an esco dash, Arya was saying with an exasperated look as the little sister strolled past her. It's better than staying in this glum room for hours. Very well, lead the way princess, Loona said. From her tone it was easy to tell that she was used to getting what she wanted when she wanted it. Listen to me. Arya blurted out as she threw her hands down. I will be taking my leave. By myself. Without your company. Arya told the siblings, her face flush with her annoyance. Come back into the room at once. Both of you. Kyoko demanded of her charges as she stepped into the doorway. I am to watch over and protect you while your parents are busy and thus you cannot dash. They said you had to watch us and take us to the room. They never said we couldn't leave, Stanmore responded while cutting the woman off. That's not what they meant, Kyoko told the boy. Not their intention but technically true, Loona added. That's not how this works, the kunoichi said, not budging on this issue. And there you have it, so I'll be going. Arya chose this point to speak up again as she took off down the hall while giving a wave to the siblings she'd encountered by chance. Hey! It's dangerous to wander about by yourself. Stanmore blurted out as he took off after the girl. Soon after Loona took off after her brother. Making me run, how annoying, the little girl muttered. Rushing out of the room, Kyoko made one last attempt at calling the two children back before she chased after them. If Elizabeth ever found out she'd let her children wander this castle, then there'd be hell to pay. Can I ask you something? Ray asked the blonde accompanying her as the fierce blizzard outside rattled the old windows that lined this section of the castle. Sure, the boy told her without skipping a step. They had been wandering for what seemed like an eternity to the young boy, but still he continued on without a second thought. Even if Arya had been a JRK, there was no way he could just let her wander around on her own. It's something I've had on my mind for a while, the holy mage began with a slight nod, but you said you met her in the Demon Lord's palace, correct? Could you tell me how that happened? Oh, that? Naruto asked with a big grin as he looked over his shoulder and back at the teen following him. Old man Hokage was showing me a bunch of old scrolls that weren't supposed to do anything but had to leave when one of the mask-wearing guys showed up. He said he'd be back real quick, and so he let me look through the rest of the scrolls on my own. When I found one that was really old, the boy exclaimed as he turned around to throw his arms out, starting to walk backwards as he faced the mage. I opened it up, and like all of the other ones, it was filled with scribbles and lines that made no sense, but as I looked at it I got this weird feeling in my stomach. I didn't know what it was, but the next thing I knew was that the ink on the scroll started to glow, and then poof. I was in this big fancy castle with Arya standing on the balcony. Naruto summarized the events that transpired that day, making grand gestures with his arms as he did. So he was transported to the Demon Lord's palace. Where did he originate from? He said was looking through scrolls so that could narrow it down, but he also mentioned there was some age to them. So scrolls might not be a big form of logging information in his homeland, and he was just skimming through old relics. And about this Hokage. The word itself isn't familiar to me. Could it be a part of the local language? The thought started running through Rei's mind like water down a river. She could ponder that small bit of information for hours and not come to any definitive conclusions. Fortunately, it seems like Naruto has no issue answering anything she'd ask of him. So you just appeared in front of your friend? That must be some powerful magic, and to be held in a single scroll no less, Rei commented with a gentle smile. Folding his arms behind his head, Naruto's gaze tilted up as a thoughtful expression came over his face. Did I say something strange? Rei wondered as she watched the blonde's reactions. Is chakra magic? Naruto finally voiced his thought after a moment to think it over. Chakra. Rei repeated with arched brows. If she recalled correctly, there were a handful of philosophies that used that word in their teachings. She had encountered such information during her studies but brushed it aside in favor of more pressing matters. Perhaps that was a mistake. Regardless, she felt it was safe to assume that the energy they referred to as chakra was simply the spiritual energy that flowed through every living beings, aside from the corruption they call monsters. Another clue, the teen thought before opening her mouth to reply. I believe they're the same, or at the very least they have overlapping principles, the girl told him. Without a clear grasp of what chakra was, she couldn't say anything with certainty, but if she went with the premise that it was just spiritual energy, then she could confidently say that it was used for magic. Then again, it would be false to say that spiritual energy was magic, since it only served as a source of power for magic and was not actually magic itself, but perhaps she shouldn't go into the details and specifics. If she did that, then they'd be there for hours without her learning anything else. Okay, the blonde chirped with a firm nod. So that old scroll had a lot of magic, or what if Naruto was in the middle of saying when a loud grumble from his stomach cut him off. Seeing the boy stop in place, Rei watched as his face heated up in embarrassment before a moment later he had spun around so that his back was facing her and his flushed face was facing away. It was adorable. Bringing her hand up to cover her mouth, Rei attempted to stifle a giggle, 2 less than satisfactory results. I suppose we have been walking for a while now, Rei remarked as she walked forward, and as she passed by the blonde her hand reached down to take hold of his smaller one. As he watched her pull him along, his eyes darting back and forth between her gentle expression and their joined hands, Naruto heard her tell him, I know where we can get some food. Elsewhere in the castle. This is humiliating. Stanmore grumbled with his arm crossed at his current predicament. It was impressive that they stayed ahead of Kyoko for as long as they had, but it was only inevitable that the woman would catch them, and now he was being held at her side, her arm wrapped around his midsection, allowing his body to hang limply like a sack of flour. For once we agree, Loona remarked from her similar position in the woman's other arm. Find yourselves fortunate that I'm in a lenient mood, Kyoko told the 2 children she held as she calmly followed behind Arya. She should have went immediately back to the room upon catching them, but then they just complained that they didn't see Arya to her destination. You shouldn't have, Arya breathed out sarcastically with her arms crossed over her chest much like Stanmore held his. She had no longing for these strangers to be present when she apologized, or had Naruto apologize. Yes, Naruto would apologize. After all, she had nothing to say sorry for, nothing at all. We can walk on our own. Stanmore barked out in annoyance as he started to squirm around in the Kunoichi's arms. That's correct. Our legs are unharmed and perfectly capable of transporting us, Loona added. Royalty or not, I will not tolerate insubordination. Consider this your punishment, Kyoko told the two children. Man, this is such a pain in the butt. Ow. Stanmore was complaining when Kyoko's tail swung up and stuck him across his behind. What the hell was the OW? The boy was shouting when another tail lashing fell upon him. A prince should not speak with such foul language, Kyoko told the boy. And what about Loona? I didn't see you smack her when she called me a dumbass, the prince complained with small tears welling up in his eyes from the sting still lingering on his cheeks. I am a tiny, delicate flower. One should not use physical punishment on one such as I, Loona commented with a sideways glance at her brother, accompanied by a smug smirk. Damn it. Don't go playing favorites like the YAOW, the boy was complaining when yet another swing of Kyoko's tail pulled a pained yelp from him. If only you'd learn, Loona remarked as she turned her gaze away from her brother, her smirk staying as she did so. Meanwhile Stanmore settled for muttering angrily about annoying little sisters and unruly servants. All the while Arya had been watching from over her shoulder. Well, at least they're not boring. How did you know about this place? Naruto asked as he searched through a wooden cabinet built beneath a dark stone counter. They were currently in a kitchen that looked like it could comfortably fit 20 workers with multiple counters ready to prepare food at, unlit fire pits with large cooking pots kept over them by metal platforms, many cabinets, and many more utensils hung from the wall along with a large set of wooden doors connecting to a walk-in pantry. Aside from the entrance they came in from was another hallway that connected to the dining hall. Being deeper within the castle there were no windows to provide light, for as little as that would have helped, and instead the barren sections of the walls were lined with torches. I found it while I was exploring last night, the teen answered as she pulled out a small satchel from one of the cabinets she'd opened. Had Naruto not been so hungry or a bit older he might have questioned how she was able to lead them here so easily when before they'd been walking around in circles. Found something, the girl said after checking the contents of the satchel. It was just a bit of dried meat but it should be enough for them. Awesome. Naruto cheered as he pulled his head out of the cabinet he was looking in, nearly avoiding a hard hit to the top of his head as he did so. What is it? Whoa. Naruto asked as he stood up and turned toward the girl only to be nearly blindsided by the tossed satchel. Eat up, Ray told the boy around the strp of meat she held in her mouth. Tearing a chunk off, the teen gave him a wide smile. I have plenty of questions I want you to answer. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for more crossovers. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author marshalanime on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.